Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a nice idea if everyone can leave a comment and let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was a little after 7 when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it was already dark outside. My porch light was dim, barely lighting up a small patch of concrete. I peeked through the curtain. A man stood there, wearing a dark jacket. He didn't have any sort of uniform, just regular clothes. His face was blank, no smile, no polite nod. He knocked again, harder this time. I opened the door but kept the chain on. "Yeah. Power company," he said quickly. "There's an emergency. We need to check your breaker. Might be a risk." I frowned. I hadn't noticed anything wrong. The lights were on, the TV was running. I didn't smell smoke, no flickering lights. "Can I see some ID?" He shifted. His hands were in his jacket pockets. "Didn't bring it. We were rushing. Got reports of surges." I shook my head. "Sorry, I can't let you in without proof. You understand." He leaned in closer. The porch light caught his face. Early 40s maybe, rough skin, dark stubble. His eyes didn't blink much. They stayed locked on mine. "Listen, lady. It's for your safety. You really want to take that chance?" I didn't answer. My heartbeat picked up. Something felt wrong. He was too aggressive. Most service workers would back off, offer a number to call. Not him. "I'll just take a quick look," he said, pushing against the door. The chain strained but held. "Back up." My voice cracked. His mouth twitched. "Come on. I don't have time for this." He gave the door another push. I slammed it shut. My hands fumbled to lock it. I backed away, my chest tight. Through the peephole, he stayed put, breathing heavily. He knocked again, louder. "I'll call the cops," I yelled through the door. He didn't respond, just stared. After a long moment, he stepped back and disappeared down the steps. I stood frozen, my phone clutched tight. My hands were shaking. Minutes passed. I peeked through the curtain. My driveway was empty. No sign of him. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling he was nearby. I called the non-emergency line. They took down the details and said they'd send a car through the neighborhood. I locked every door and checked the windows. Even the basement one I always forgot about. The rest of the night was silent. I barely slept. Every sound made me flinch. But no one came back. The next morning, I called the power company. They confirmed what I already knew. No one had been sent out. There was no emergency. The man had lied. The officer who followed up said they'd had reports of similar incidents recently. Men posing as workers, trying to get inside homes. Usually older women. Alone. They knocked during early evening, the officer said. Not too late. People are relaxed, maybe distracted. That's when they try. I kept the chain on for weeks, even when it was just a delivery. My phone stayed within reach. Every time I passed the front window, I checked the street. And sometimes, even now, I feel like I'm being watched. Like someone's out there, waiting for the right moment to knock again. I went out hiking alone like I always did, planned everything, packed my bag, checked the weather. The trail wasn't one of those popular ones where you pass people every few minutes. It was quiet, miles of nothing but trees and dirt. That's what I liked about it. I started in the late morning, sun already high. It was supposed to be an out and back trail, about 7 miles total. I wasn't worried. I had done longer ones. About 2 miles in, I stopped to drink water and tighten my bootlaces. That's when I noticed him. He wasn't close. Maybe 100 feet back. Just a guy in a dark jacket, walking slow. At first, I thought he was just another hiker. It was public land, after all. But something was off. I hadn't passed anyone going the other way, and I didn't hear footsteps before I stopped. It was like he just appeared. I shook it off and started walking again. The trail had switchbacks, and every time I turned, I'd glance back. He was still there, always the same distance. Never speeding up, never slowing down. Just there. At the 3-mile mark, the path split. One way continued the normal route, the other was a shortcut back to the parking lot. I took the shortcut. About 5 minutes in, I checked over my shoulder. He had taken it too. I stopped walking. He stopped too. I turned forward and kept going. The trees got thicker. The sun wasn't as strong here. The air felt colder. I was walking faster now, but so was he. Not running, just keeping up. The shortcut wasn't really a shortcut, more like an alternate route. It was narrower, rockier. It looped back closer to the main trail near a dried-up creek bed. I figured if I could get there, I'd have more space to move, maybe even double back without him seeing. But then, I didn't hear his footsteps anymore. I slowed down, listening. Nothing. I turned around. He wasn't there. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. The trees on either side of me were thick, enough space for someone to step behind one and disappear. I kept walking, faster now. I made it to the creek bed. The ground was uneven, scattered with loose rocks. I was about to cross when something moved in my side vision. Not behind me, ahead. He was standing between the trees, just past the creek bed. He had circled around. I stopped so fast I almost tripped. He was closer now, maybe 50 feet away. Close enough that I could see his face. He wasn't out of breath. He wasn't sweating. He just stood there, staring. I pretended to adjust my boot, trying to act normal. My brain was racing. He hadn't said anything. Hadn't called out, hadn't asked for directions, nothing. Just following, just watching. I stood up, turned left off the path, and started moving uphill. It wasn't a trail, just steep forest, but I didn't care. I didn't look back. I just climbed. My legs were shaking. My heart felt like it was punching my ribs. Branches snapped behind me. I didn't stop. Then I heard him. Not his voice, his breathing. It was close. I ran. I didn't think, just ran. The ground was uneven, covered in dead leaves. I slipped, caught myself on a tree, kept going. My pack was heavy, pulling at my shoulders. I heard footsteps pounding behind me. There was a fallen tree ahead. I vaulted over it, landed hard on my knee, but didn't stop. The footsteps were faster now. He wasn't just following anymore. He was chasing. I don't know how long I ran. The trees thinned out, the sky opened up. I saw the dirt road that led to the parking lot. My car was still far, but there were two other cars now, people unloading gear. I sprinted. I didn't look back until I reached them. He was gone. I must have looked insane, out of breath, shaking. The couple near their car asked if I was okay. I nodded, got into my car, locked the doors. I sat there for a long time. There was no ranger station nearby, just a sign-in sheet at the trailhead. No cameras, no cell service until you drove 10 miles out. I never saw his face again. Never saw him leave. I don't hike alone anymore. I moved into my apartment last August. It was small, just a one-bedroom, but it was cheap and close to campus. The first month went fine. I kept to myself, didn't throw any parties, barely even talked to my neighbors. Classes had started, and most nights I'd stay up late studying. It wasn't until October that I started noticing things. Little things. I'd come home and my keys wouldn't be where I left them. Or a cabinet door would be cracked open when I swore I had closed it. Once, I found a coffee mug in the sink that I didn't remember using. But it was just me there, so I figured I'd done it without thinking. Then my phone charger went missing. I searched everywhere. I even pulled the couch cushions out, thinking it might have slipped in there. No luck. A few days later, I found it plugged in behind the nightstand. It didn't make sense. I hadn't moved it, but I was tired. Midterms were coming up. I chalked it up to stress, but it didn't stop. My shampoo bottle was empty one day, even though I had just bought it. A half-eaten granola bar appeared on the kitchen counter. And then, the smell. It was faint, like sweat and something sour. I scrubbed the floors, the bathroom, even dumped baking soda down the drains. Nothing worked. It would come and go, like someone had been there and left. I told a friend about it, but she laughed it off. "You're just paranoid," she said. "Living alone gets in your head." Maybe she was right. I tried to forget it, but the feeling never went away. That prickling on the back of my neck. That sense that someone was watching. I started double-checking the locks. I bought a small chain lock for extra security. Every night, I would stand by the door, twisting the knob just to make sure. Then one night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first. The apartment was dark, but the air felt heavier. I stayed still, listening. There was a faint sound from the ceiling, like a soft creak. I held my breath. Another creak. My eyes darted to the attic hatch in the hallway. It was closed. It was always closed. But that morning, when I got up, it was different. The hatch wasn't flush with the ceiling. It hung slightly, like it hadn't been pushed back in all the way. Dust had fallen around it. I didn't know what to think. My heart was pounding. I grabbed a chair and pushed it under the hatch. My hands shook as I reached up. I slid it open and peered inside. It was dark, but empty. Just insulation and wooden beams. I called maintenance. They came the next day, took a quick look, and told me there weren't any signs of pests. I asked if there was another entrance. They said no. I felt stupid, but I couldn't shake it. That night, I ordered a small security camera. Just something to make me feel better. I set it up in the living room, facing the hall where the attic hatch was. The app on my phone let me watch the feed live. The first night, nothing happened. I checked it in the morning and the footage was empty. The second night, the same. I almost convinced myself I'd imagined everything. Then came the third night. I woke up to the sound of the phone vibrating on my nightstand. It was the camera app motion detected. My stomach clenched. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The footage started just after 3 a.m. At first, it was still. The dim glow from the streetlights cast long shadows across the room. Then, the hatch shifted. Slowly. The corner of it lifted, and a hand emerged. Pale. Thin. It gripped the edge, pulling it open further. My breathing quickened. A face appeared. Hollow eyes. Stringy hair. The person lowered themselves down, their bare feet touching the floor without a sound. They stood there, swaying slightly, their head tilted as if listening. My hands shook. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The stranger moved toward the kitchen, disappearing from view. For minutes, nothing happened. Then they reappeared, holding something. My water bottle. They took a sip, then wandered aimlessly, like they belonged there. Then they stopped, turned, stared directly at the camera. The feed cut off. I threw on the lights, trembling as I dialed 911. My voice shook as I tried to explain. The dispatcher told me to stay locked in my room. Officers arrived within minutes. They checked the apartment. No one was there. The attic hatch was closed, but the camera still had the footage. I showed them everything. They found signs in the attic. A small pile of blankets, food wrappers, empty water bottles. Someone had been living up there. For how long, they didn't know. The maintenance workers hadn't noticed because the intruder had tucked everything into a corner, hidden behind the beams. They said he likely came down when I was out, ate my food, used my things, watched me. The landlord had the hatch sealed the next day. I moved out a week later. I don't live alone anymore, and I never ignore those little signs again. It was around 7 in the evening when I heard the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I lived alone, had no friends in the area, and my family was hours away. I hesitated before going to the door. My building was one of those older apartment complexes where you had to be buzzed in, but sometimes people tailgate their way inside. I looked through the peephole. A man stood there in a dark blue uniform. Not a police uniform, something else. The logo on his shirt was too small to read. He held a clipboard in one hand and a tool bag in the other. Plumbing inspection, he said before I even asked. Building sent me. I didn't open the door. No one told me about an inspection, I said. Yeah, sorry about that, he replied. His voice was calm, polite. There was a leak reported in one of the units. Management wants all the pipes checked just in case. Something felt off. I couldn't place it, but my stomach tightened. I'm going to call them to confirm, I said. He didn't react. Just stood there, holding the clipboard. Go ahead. I stepped away from the door, grabbed my phone, and dialed the management company's number. It rang twice before someone answered. I asked about the inspection. There was silence on the other end. Then, we didn't send anyone. My hands went cold. I turned my head toward the door. He was still standing there. Clipboard. Tool bag. Watching. Are you sure? I whispered. "We don't have any plumbing issues," the woman said. "We don't have anyone out there tonight." I hung up. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. I took a step closer to the door but didn't make a sound. Through the peephole, I saw him shift his weight from one foot to the other. Then, as if he could hear me, he knocked again. A little louder this time. I forced my voice to stay steady. "I just called management. They didn't send anyone." Silence. Then he smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't embarrassed, like someone caught in a mistake. It was slow, purposeful. He lifted a hand, pressed it flat against the door. And then he leaned in. Not to look through the peephole. Just close enough that I could barely see his face anymore. Close enough that I could hear his breathing through the wood. I backed away. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. I grabbed my phone again, ready to call 911. But before I could, he knocked one last time. 3 slow knocks. Then he turned and walked down the hall. I listened for the sound of the front door opening, but it never came. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with the TV on, every light in my apartment burning. Every noise made my skin crawl. The next morning, I told my landlord what happened. They checked the security footage. No one ever buzzed in. There was no sign of him leaving. I stopped for gas at a station just off the highway. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and the place was nearly empty. Only a single car at the far end, and I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. The air was thick, warm for the season, and the fluorescent lights above buzzed quietly. I kept the pump running and leaned against my car, scrolling through my phone. That's when I noticed him. He came from the shadows on the side of the building, like he'd been waiting there. Tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes. He walked with purpose, but not rushed. I should have gotten back into my car right then. But I didn't. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. "Do you know how to get to Parker Road from here?" His face was strange, too friendly. Smiling like he wasn't sure how much to smile. It felt wrong. I shook my head, keeping my phone close. "No, sorry. I'm not from around here." He didn't seem disappointed. Just nodded like he expected that answer. "It's okay. Been driving a while, must have missed my turn. No big deal." I tried to stay polite, but my hands were already shaking. He was too close. Not dangerously close, but just enough to make my stomach knot. The gas pump clicked, signaling it was full. I reached to pull the nozzle out, trying to stay calm. He didn't move. "Safe travels," I said, forcing a smile, then I turned away. I moved quickly, placing the nozzle back and shutting the gas cap. Every nerve in my body told me to go. But before I could, I heard him again. "Hey!" He was still smiling, but his eyes were cold. "Your taillight's cracked. Thought you should know." I glanced back at my car. My taillight wasn't cracked. It was perfectly fine when I pulled in. I opened my door, trying not to look at him. "Thanks," I mumbled. He stepped a little closer. "Drive safe." I shut the door fast and pressed the lock button. The doors clicked, and I exhaled. But when I checked the dashboard, the lock indicator showed one door wasn't secure. Passenger side. I looked over. The door was still slightly ajar. Just enough. My hands were trembling. I pressed the lock button again. The rest of the locks clicked, but that one wouldn't catch. I tried again. Nothing. Then I saw him. He had moved to the passenger side, his smile wider now. He stood just out of view of the side mirror, but I saw his reflection faintly in the window. His eyes were on me, watching. My heart pounded. I jammed the lock button over and over, but it didn't matter. The door stayed unlocked. He took a step closer. I hit the engine start button. The car roared to life, and for a second, I saw his smile falter. He knew I was about to drive. But then he lunged. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I shot forward, the door flapping slightly open. I didn't care. I didn't look back. I pulled out of the station, speeding down the empty road. My pulse was racing, but I couldn't stop checking my mirrors. Headlights appeared behind me, but they didn't follow. No sign of him. Nothing. It wasn't until I reached a motel hours later that I finally checked the passenger door. I locked it manually, double-checked it 3 times. My hands were still trembling. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling. I went back to the car and inspected everything. That's when I noticed it. A thin piece of black tape, barely visible, jammed into the latch of the passenger door. It kept the lock from engaging. Someone had done it on purpose. And I knew exactly who it was. I was walking home from my friend's house. It wasn't late, maybe 8 or 9, and the sun had already gone down. The streetlights were on, but the road was mostly empty. Just the hum of crickets and the occasional car passing by. I turned onto my street, maybe 10 minutes from home, when I noticed the van. It was white, old, maybe from the 90s. No company logos or anything, just plain with a few rust spots along the bottom. It drove past slowly, barely above a crawl. I didn't think much of it at first. Probably someone lost or looking for an address. But then it stopped. Not right away. It went maybe 50 feet ahead, then came to a complete stop. I felt my stomach tighten. I told myself it wasn't anything. Cars stop all the time. Maybe they were checking directions. But as I kept walking, I could see the driver. He was a man, maybe 40 or 50. I couldn't make out every detail in the dim light, but he had a scruffy face, unshaven. His hands were on the wheel, but he wasn't looking at the road. He was looking at me. I tried not to stare. Just kept walking. My pace quickened, and I pulled my hood up. I could hear my own heartbeat, that dull thud in my chest. Then the van started moving again. It crept along, matching my pace. Not close enough to be obvious, but enough that I knew. My mouth was dry. I didn't want to run. Running would make it worse. My dad always said if you feel like someone's following you, don't go straight home. You don't want them knowing where you live. I took a left instead. The van followed. The street was quiet. No people, no cars. Just the sound of the tires rolling slowly behind me. I could feel him watching. I reached for my phone. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to call my parents. I didn't want to sound stupid if this turned out to be nothing. But my fingers hovered over the call button anyway. Then the van sped up. Not fast. Just enough to pass me. It drove ahead and turned the corner. I stopped, listening. Nothing. just the hum of distant traffic. I waited, trying to catch my breath. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But as I turned the corner, the van was there, parked on the side of the road. No headlights, no sound, just sitting there. And this time, the man wasn't pretending. He was leaning forward, arms resting on the steering wheel, staring directly at me. I froze. My legs felt heavy. I could see the windshield clearly now. There were no plates. No front plate, no temporary tag. Just a blank, dirty bumper. I walked faster. My phone was still in my hand, but I couldn't think. My mind kept racing. What if he got out? What if he grabbed me? My feet pounded against the pavement, and every shadow felt like it was shifting. But he didn't get out. He didn't move. He just kept watching. I took another turn, this time onto a larger street. A gas station was up ahead, the lights glowing. I could see a car parked by the pumps. A person inside. Safety. I ran. My legs burned, but I didn't stop until I reached the station. I stumbled inside, gasping. The cashier looked up, startled, but I didn't say anything. I just stood there, heart pounding, waiting, watching the lot. But the van never came. I stayed there for a while, pretending to look at drinks. My phone buzzed with a message from my mom, asking when I'd be home. I told her I'd be a little late. Eventually, I called my dad. He came to get me. I didn't tell him everything, just that I didn't feel safe walking home. When we drove back, the van was gone, but I still check over my shoulder now. Every time I walk alone, every time I see a white van, I feel that knot in my stomach. And I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching. I was dog sitting for my neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks. She had this little terrier named Daisy, yappy but sweet. She left for a weekend trip and asked if I could stay over since Daisy got anxious when left alone. I didn't mind. Free Wi-Fi, a stocked fridge, and $50 a day. Easy. The first night was quiet. I fed Daisy, watched TV, and crashed on the couch. Around midnight, I woke up to this faint noise. At first, I thought it was the wind or the owls settling, but it was rhythmic, like a soft tapping. Knock. Pause. Knock. I sat up, listening. Daisy's ears perked, but she didn't bark. Just stared toward the basement door. That's when I realized where it was coming from. The basement. It wasn't loud, just barely there, like someone tapping lightly. Maybe pipes or the furnace. I tried to shake it off. Old houses make noise. But every time I started to drift back to sleep, the knocking came again. I told myself I'd check it out in the morning. But it didn't stop. Eventually, I got up. The basement door was in the kitchen. One of those old wooden ones with a latch that creaked no matter how careful you were. I flipped on the kitchen light and stood there, staring at it. Knock. I unlocked the latch. My hands were sweaty. I tried to laugh at myself. Probably a loose pipe or something. I pulled the door open, and the basement light clicked on automatically. Dim and yellow. The stairs stretched down into the dark, and that damp, mildewy smell hit me. Hello? I called out, mostly just to break the silence. The knocking had stopped. I waited. Nothing. Just the low hum of the furnace. I figured I'd check the pipes quickly and go back to bed. Daisy stood at the top of the stairs, ears flattened, whining low in her throat. I hated how steep the stairs were. Narrow and creaky. The walls were unfinished concrete with dark stains. I kept my eyes on the floor, not wanting to see anything I didn't have to. When I reached the bottom, I scanned the room. Old storage boxes, a rusty water heater, and a washing machine that looked like it belonged in a museum. No leaks. No signs of anything strange. Then I heard it. A faint voice. Not loud. Muffled. Like it was behind something. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. Help. I thought I imagined it. Maybe the wind or something. But then it came again. Help me. I backed up toward the stairs. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was lower. Toward the far side of the basement, where there was a small metal door near the floor. One of those old coal chutes, I think. But it was shut tight. Is someone there? I called out. The voice didn't respond. I wanted to run. My mind screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. What if someone was down there? What if they were hurt? My hand shook as I reached for the handle of the metal door. It was rusted, stiff. I yanked, and it gave with a loud screech. Behind it was a crawl space. Dark, barely big enough for someone to fit. I held my breath, waiting for something to move. Nothing. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark. The dirt floor was damp. There were old bricks and bits of broken wood. But no one. I checked the rest of the basement, faster this time. Nothing but shadows. By the time I got back upstairs, I locked the basement door and wedged a chair under the knob. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every creak of the house made me jump. But no more knocking. No voices. When Mrs. Hendricks got back, I didn't mention it. I didn't want her to think I was crazy. But before I left, I couldn't help myself. I peeked into the basement one last time. The metal door was shut. I know I left it open. I don't usually do things like this, but I feel like I need to write it down. It was a normal night. I had gone out with some friends to a bar downtown, just a little get-together after work. Nothing fancy, just drinks and chatting, winding down. I'm not one to stay out late, but we had a good time. Around midnight, I decided it was time to head home. I left my friends at the bar and walked to the street to grab a cab. There was one parked right there. The driver waved as I approached, and I got in. I remember he was an older man, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s. Nothing about him stood out. He had a bit of gray hair and glasses. His clothes looked like they belonged to someone who did this for a living, worn but clean. I told him my address, and we started driving. I wasn't too familiar with the route he took at first, but I didn't think anything of it. There are so many little side streets in the city. Maybe he was just avoiding traffic. I didn't pay much attention, not at first. I was tired and just wanted to get home. The cab started turning down some back roads. Streets I didn't recognize. I didn't really think about it at first. It was dark, and I was half asleep, but something about it started to feel off. We kept going, and the streets started to look more and more unfamiliar. There were fewer streetlights, and the houses were spaced further apart. We passed through areas that seemed run down, old, abandoned. I tried to ignore it, but I started to get that sinking feeling in my stomach. I looked at the driver. His eyes were on the road, but his face was expressionless, almost stiff. At some point, I decided to speak up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice a little hesitant. "This isn't the way to my place. I think you missed a turn." He didn't say anything right away. There was just this pause, like he didn't hear me. Then he gave a slight nod and muttered something under his breath. Yeah, just a shortcut. Avoiding traffic." I wasn't convinced. I knew the area well enough to know there wasn't any traffic this late at night. I looked out the window again. The streetlights were fewer now. The houses were spaced out, and the trees seemed to block the view, making it even darker. There were no other cars around, no signs of life. I felt that feeling again. That sinking, uncomfortable sensation in my stomach. I tried to remain calm. I didn't want to panic. "Could you just turn around?" "I'd rather go back the other way," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond at first. Then, after a long silence, he spoke, but his voice sounded strange. "We're almost there." "Almost where?" I asked, now feeling a lump form in my throat. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer me. He just kept driving, the headlights of the cab cutting through the dark, illuminating more trees, empty fields, and abandoned buildings. It was so quiet now. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio, which was tuned to static. I could feel my heart starting to race. Something wasn't right. I wasn't going to sit here and wait for something bad to happen. I needed to get out of there. I reached for the door handle, but before I could even touch it, I heard the click of the lock. I froze. I pulled on the handle again. Locked. "Let me out," I said, my voice sharp now, panic creeping in. "I want to get out." "Stop the car." The driver didn't look at me. He didn't even move. His hands were firmly on the wheel, and he just kept driving, like nothing was happening. I could feel my chest tightening, my breath getting shallow. I tried again, this time harder. "Please, stop the car. I want to get out." Still nothing. I knew I had to act fast. I reached for my phone, but it wasn't in my purse. I had left it on the seat next to me, and in my panic, I had knocked it onto the floor. I couldn't remember where it had fallen. I started scrambling, feeling around the floor, the seats. My hands were shaking. I couldn't focus. My mind was racing. I knew I had to get out of there. I had to figure something out. I needed to get away from him. But the more I tried to think clearly, the more everything started to blur. I looked around frantically, trying to spot something, anything that could help. Then, I saw it. The glove compartment. I didn't know what was inside, but I had to try. I reached over and yanked it open. Nothing but a few papers and a pair of gloves. No phone, no weapon, nothing. I started to panic again. I felt trapped. I wanted to scream, but I didn't know if that would help. I didn't want to anger him or provoke him more. I needed to keep calm. I turned back toward the driver. "Please, let me out. I'm not going with you. I don't know where you're taking me, but I don't want to be here anymore." For the first time, he looked at me. His eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. His expression was unreadable, cold. "Stop the car. Let me out, now." I shouted. He kept his eyes on the road. He didn't say a word. The silence in the car was suffocating. My mind was screaming. There had to be something I could do. I looked out the window again. We were on a dark road with no signs of life. The houses were farther apart now, and there were no lights. No cars. It was like we were in the middle of nowhere. I started thinking about running, jumping out of the car, but I didn't know what would happen if I did. I thought about it for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, I saw lights in the distance. The faint glow of headlights. A car coming toward us. I couldn't believe it. I knew I had to take a chance. I screamed. I don't even remember what I said, just trying to get his attention. The driver didn't react. But the other car was getting closer, and I could see it now. It was coming up fast, and it wasn't slowing down. The moment the other car got close, I did it. I yanked the door handle with all my strength. This time, it opened. I bolted. I don't know how I managed to get out of the car without being stopped. But I ran. I ran toward the headlights, toward the car that was speeding up. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could. The car screeched to a stop just as I reached it. A man jumped out, looking confused but concerned. "Are you okay?" "What's going on?" he asked, holding his hand out to me. I didn't have time to explain. I grabbed his arm, pulling myself into the passenger seat, and I slammed the door behind me. The man started asking questions, but I could barely speak. I just pointed to the cab that had stopped a little further down the road. The driver was still sitting there, watching. We drove away as fast as the other car could go. I kept looking out the back window, making sure he wasn't following. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, but the farther we got, the more my heart started to slow. Eventually, we reached a gas station, and I got out of the car as quickly as I could. The man in the other car asked if I needed help, but I just thanked him and walked away, not looking back. I never got into another cab again after that night. It's hard to even begin writing this. It still feels unreal, like it was a nightmare I'm still trying to wake up from. But I need to get this out. A few weeks ago, my husband and I returned from a week-long vacation. It was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, just the two of us, a break from work and everything that goes on in life. We spent the week in a small cabin, hiking, relaxing, disconnecting. No emails, no calls. Just us, nature, and no worries. It was exactly what we needed. When we finally pulled up to our house, I remember feeling that usual relief that comes with being home. The house looked the same, quiet, comfortable. But as soon as we stepped out of the car, something didn't feel right. There was this strange tension in the air, and I couldn't place it. My husband, Mark, didn't say anything at first, but I saw him glance around the yard like something was off too. We walked up to the front door, and that's when I noticed it. The door was unlocked. We always lock everything when we leave, especially since we have the security cameras, but this time, the door was wide open. It wasn't hanging all the way, but it was definitely open enough to catch my attention. "Did you leave the door unlocked?" I asked Mark. He shook his head. "No. We locked it before we left." He pulled out his keys and walked in first, his face changing as soon as he crossed the threshold. I followed him inside, and that's when I saw it. The entire place was ransacked. The living room looked like it had been hit by a tornado. All the cushions on the couch were thrown on the floor. Picture frames were taken off the walls and tossed around. The bookshelves were overturned. Things were scattered everywhere. Papers, magazines, even our plants had been knocked over. But none of our electronics were gone. The TV was still there, the laptop on the desk was untouched, and our phones were charging on the kitchen counter. I couldn't process what I was seeing. If this had been a break-in, surely they would have taken the valuables, right? But nothing was missing. It didn't make sense. I checked the kitchen, and it was the same. Cabinets were open, and some of the food had been taken out of the fridge, but nothing seemed valuable was gone. It felt more like someone had just looked through everything, touched everything, but hadn't taken anything. I went to check the bedrooms while Mark started checking the locks on the windows and doors. Our bedroom was the same, things were out of place, but nothing was gone. The dresser drawers were open, but there was no sign that anything had been stolen. The bathroom was the same, too messy, but nothing missing. It was like someone had just been there, hanging around, rummaging through our stuff, without taking anything. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't understand it. It didn't feel like a break-in. It felt like... I don't even know how to explain it. A violation, but not in the way I was used to hearing about. I didn't know if I was scared or just confused. "Mark, call the police," I said, my voice shaky. He was already on the phone. While he was doing that, I grabbed my phone to check the security cameras. We had cameras set up around the house, but they were pretty standard, nothing too fancy. I hoped they would give us some answers. Mark hung up the phone when he finished reporting everything to the police. He was standing by the front door, just staring at the camera feed on my phone. "We should have checked the footage sooner," I said, trying to calm myself. He nodded, but his eyes were wide. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the phone screen. I opened the app, swiped through to see the first footage, the camera at the front porch. The time showed the night before we got back. The video was normal at first. A few cars drove past. Then, at 1:23 a.m., someone appeared on the porch. It wasn't a neighbor or a delivery person. The figure was tall, wearing a hooded jacket that covered their face, and they just stood there. I thought at first maybe it was a mistake, someone standing in front of the camera. But then the figure moved. It stepped up to the door and fumbled with something, probably our lock, but didn't open it right away. It looked like they were just standing there, trying to figure out how to get in. I froze. Mark's face drained of color. I could see his hands tremble as he held my phone. The figure seemed to be waiting, but then they disappeared from the frame. For a few seconds, I thought the video had cut off or something, but then it resumed. The figure was inside. The door had been opened. Whoever it was, they had gotten in. My heart started pounding as I watched, unable to look away. The person moved around the living room slowly, deliberately. They picked up objects from the coffee table, set them down, opened the cabinets, and rifled through the drawers. It was like they were just looking through our things, touching everything, without any hurry or concern. At 2:15 a.m., the figure finally left. They walked back out the front door, but here's the part that gets to me. They didn't close the door. It stayed open for the rest of the night, until we arrived the next day. The video footage showed no other movement after the figure left, no one else entered, and the door just stayed open. The strangest part? The figure never left the frame. I replayed it a few times, and there was no sign of them leaving through the back or any other exit. They never reappeared. It was like they had just disappeared, but I couldn't see them leave the house. I don't know if the police were able to get anything from the footage. They took it for evidence, but we never heard back. What still haunts me is the feeling that someone was inside our house, walking through our stuff, and they never left. It didn't make any sense. Who does that? Why didn't they take anything? Why stay inside for hours without ever leaving? Mark and I tried to go back to normal after that. We've got the locks changed, and the police checked the house again, but nothing was ever really explained. It's been a few weeks, and every time I walk into the house, I feel like someone's still there, like something is watching me. The silence is suffocating. I still can't shake the image of the figure in the video, standing in our house, just looking through our things and never leaving. I wish I could forget it. I wish I could feel safe again, but every creak in the house, every strange sound, makes me think they're still here. And maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for us to leave again. I've never been much of an outdoorsman. Hiking was never really my thing, but a few months ago, I thought I'd try it. I needed something different, a break from the usual routine. I had a few days off work, so I decided to take a solo hike through the mountains. I thought it would be peaceful, just me, nature, and the quiet. I wasn't prepared for what happened. It started out easy enough. The trail was clear, the weather was perfect, a little chilly, but nothing too bad. I had a map and a compass, but I still felt a little unsure of myself, like I was missing something. Still, I pushed on. The further I went, the less people I saw. It was a bit eerie, but nothing that made me think twice. I kept telling myself that it was just a peaceful, empty place. It was nice to get away from everything, even if I didn't know the area too well. By the time I noticed I'd gone off the trail, the sun was starting to dip. I hadn't seen any signs for a while, and the landmarks I was relying on weren't there anymore. I figured I'd just keep going a little further and double back if I needed to. But then the forest started to feel wrong. The trees looked different, and the air felt heavier. I thought I could still find my way back, so I kept moving, but I was starting to get that feeling, when something's not quite right but you can't put your finger on it. As it got darker, I picked up my pace, trying to find a spot to rest for the night, but that was when I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. There, in a small clearing, was a campfire, or at least, what looked like a campfire that had been put out recently. It wasn't anything fancy, just a makeshift campsite. There were some logs arranged in a circle, a few scattered belongings, a sleeping bag, an old, battered backpack, and a few cans of food. But there was no one around. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. It was strange to find a campsite out there, especially this far off the trail. I was a little confused because I didn't remember passing any campsites on the way in. I thought maybe I had missed one earlier, but as I took a step closer, something caught my eye. The dirt around the camp was disturbed. It wasn't just dirt kicked up by the wind or animals. The ground had been recently moved around. And then I saw the footprints. Big ones. Fresh ones. They were deep, like someone had been walking with heavy boots, and they led away from the campsite, towards the woods. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footprints weren't mine. I could tell that much. And I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had made them was nearby. I looked around, my breath catching in my throat. The place felt suddenly claustrophobic, like the trees were pressing in on me. I turned my head back to the campsite. I felt stupid standing there, staring at something so clearly abandoned, but something told me I shouldn't just turn around and walk away. I needed to know if anyone was still here. That's when I heard something. A rustling noise, just beyond the tree line. It wasn't a wind-blown branch or a critter. It was too deliberate. Too close. I held my breath and turned slowly, trying not to make a sound. I couldn't see anything through the thick trees, but I felt it, someone was watching me. I quickly stepped back from the campsite and crouched behind a large tree, trying to make myself as small as possible. I couldn't tell if the noise was from the wind or something else, but I was starting to get that sharp, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. That sense of being stalked, of being followed, even if I couldn't see who it was. I don't know how long I waited there. It felt like hours. The sun had completely set by then, and the forest was pitch black, except for the faint outline of the campfire and the few stars visible above the canopy. I stayed as still as possible, my pulse racing, trying to convince myself that I was just overthinking it. But then I heard footsteps. Slow and heavy, crunching through the fallen leaves, moving closer to my hiding spot. I could feel my throat tighten, my hands clammy and shaking. I knew someone was out there, but I couldn't see them. I didn't know how close they were, but they were close enough that I could feel their presence. I had to move. My instincts kicked in. I stood up quickly, trying to remain as quiet as possible, and backed away slowly. The footsteps stopped. I didn't know if the person had heard me or if they had just been waiting. All I knew was I couldn't stay there anymore. I turned and ran, ignoring the twigs and rocks underfoot, focusing only on getting away from the camp, away from whoever was out there. The forest seemed to stretch on forever. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I expected to see someone following me, but there was nothing, just the dark, the trees, and the sound of my own breath. I wasn't sure how long I had been running, but I was starting to feel the weight of the exhaustion creeping in. I hadn't eaten all day, and the adrenaline was wearing off. I had no idea where I was anymore, but I knew I had to keep going. I finally stumbled upon a trail, the real one, the one I had lost earlier. My heart soared with relief. I wasn't far from the trailhead now. I made my way back, pushing through the branches and over the uneven ground, trying to ignore the panic creeping back into my chest. When I finally made it out of the woods, I didn't stop to catch my breath. I just kept walking until I hit the parking lot. I threw my stuff in the car, locked the doors, and just sat there for a while. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. I didn't feel safe. Not until I was back home, far away from that godforsaken place. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about the campsite. The footprints. The feeling of being followed. And whoever had been out there in the woods with me, moving just out of sight. I never found out who it was, or why they were there. But one thing is for sure, I'm never hiking alone again. Not in those woods. Not ever. I don't know if the person was watching me the whole time or if it was just a coincidence, but I don't want to take any chances. It felt too real, too intentional. I'll stick to the trails that have people on them from now on. I don't even know where to begin. What happened that night and the days after has completely changed everything for me. It feels like my mind is still trying to make sense of it, but no matter how many times I go over it, it still feels like it wasn't real. I guess I'll just tell you what happened, and maybe somehow it'll help me understand it a little better. It started as a typical night out. My friend Sarah and I had been at a party in the neighborhood. Nothing too wild, just a few people, some drinks, loud music, and all of us trying to have fun before the weekend ended. Around midnight, I could tell Sarah was ready to head home. She had a lot on her plate the next day and needed some sleep. Me, I wasn't as eager to leave. I wanted to stay out longer, but she said she was going to walk back home since it wasn't too far, and that I should just get a ride or walk back later. It wasn't a big deal. We always split up after parties. She lived about 10 minutes from the house we were at, while I lived a little further, so we'd usually just meet up the next day. But this time, she wanted to take a shortcut through the park to get home faster. It was a little creepy, sure, but it wasn't unheard of. We've done it 100 times before without any problems. So, we hugged goodnight, and she headed off down the street, turning into the alley that led to the park. I stayed by the main road, taking my time. Honestly, I didn't think much about it. It was a quiet night, the kind where you hear nothing but your own footsteps and the occasional car passing by. When I got home, I sent Sarah a text, as I always do when I get back to my place. Just a quick "made it home safe." She usually replied right away, but that night, there was nothing. I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe she was tired and just fell asleep. I figured I'd hear from her in the morning. But then the morning came and went. I still hadn't heard from Sarah. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I thought it was strange, but again, I didn't panic yet. Maybe her phone died, or she left it somewhere. She's done that before. But when the day stretched on and I still didn't hear from her, I started to get worried. I texted a few other people who might have seen her on the way home, but no one had. By the time it got dark, I was a wreck. I called her parents. They hadn't heard from her either, which set off alarm bells. They called the police, and after a few hours, they were out looking for her. I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah wasn't the kind of person to just vanish. She was careful, always. The police didn't find anything that night. They searched the streets, the park, and the alley she'd walked down. They even checked her usual hangouts, but there was no sign of her. I stayed up all night, my mind racing, thinking about every possible scenario. Then, the next morning, they found her phone. I don't know how it ended up where it did, but they said it was near the park, by the edge of the woods. Her phone was laying in the grass, cracked but still intact. They checked it for clues, and that's when they found something that made my blood run cold. The last video she recorded at 2:30 a.m. was the key. It wasn't much, just a few seconds, but it was enough. The video was taken from her phone as she walked through the park. The trees were mostly shadow, with only the faintest glimmer of light from a nearby street lamp, and Sarah's voice was shaky as she panned the camera around. She said something like, "I think I'm being followed, but it's probably nothing. I'm just paranoid." In the video, you could see her walking briskly down the park path. But then, as the camera moved to the left, there was a figure. A man. It was hard to make out his face in the darkness, but he was there, walking behind her. Sarah didn't notice at first. She was too busy looking around, probably trying to figure out if she was being paranoid. But the man kept following her. He wasn't walking fast, but he wasn't far behind either. Just close enough to make my heart sink when I watched it. The video goes on for a few more seconds, but she never turns around to face him. The last shot is a blurry, shaky image of the man still walking behind her, before the video cuts off abruptly. The police had no idea who the man was. They said he looked like he could have been anyone, just a guy walking home, maybe. But my gut told me it was more than that. I had never seen that guy in our neighborhood, and I'm pretty sure Sarah hadn't either. The police tried tracking down the man in the video, but they had no leads. They checked the area, canvassed the neighborhood, and even looked at nearby security footage, but they couldn't find anything more concrete. They didn't even know if he was the one who took Sarah. For days, nothing changed. We didn't hear anything about Sarah's whereabouts. The police kept searching, but the case went cold quickly. I kept thinking back to that video, the man following her, but it didn't make sense. Why would he be following her? What did he want? After that, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened to Sarah, and I felt like I was always looking over my shoulder. It was as if I was living in a nightmare where she was just out of reach. I couldn't stop reliving that video, seeing the way she never seemed to notice the man behind her, how she just kept walking as if everything was normal. I wish I could tell you that they found her, or that there was some twist, some happy ending. But they never did. It's been weeks, and still, there's no sign of her. No more leads. No new information. The police keep saying they're doing everything they can, but it doesn't feel like enough. And I can't shake the image of the man in the video. I don't know who he is. I don't know what he wanted. But I know he was following her. And that thought is the only thing that keeps me awake at night, wondering if I could have done something different. We had just moved into the house a few weeks ago, and everything felt new and fresh. It wasn't our first time moving, but it felt different this time. Maybe it was because we had been looking for so long before finally finding something that felt right. The house was big, older, but well maintained. We were excited. At first, everything was perfect. The kids had their own rooms, and we finally had enough space to spread out. But then, there was the dog. We got Max, a German Shepherd, a couple of years ago. He's a great dog. Loyal. Protective. He's always been a bit territorial, but we never had issues with him before. We moved in, and everything seemed normal at first. But then it started. Max began barking. At first, it was just at odd hours, early in the morning or late at night. We thought it was just him settling into a new environment. Maybe he was feeling unsure of his new surroundings. But as days went on, it didn't stop. It got worse. He'd sit in the living room, staring at one spot in the floor, and just bark. Non-stop. His fur would stand up, and his tail would be stiff. We would call him to stop, but he wouldn't. It didn't matter what we did, he wouldn't stop barking at that same spot. We couldn't figure out what it was. It wasn't a shadow or something outside. It was right there, in the middle of the living room. We even moved the furniture around, thinking maybe it was something that was bothering him, but no matter where we moved everything, he would still bark at that spot. I thought maybe it was a draft or some smell that was irritating him, but no one else seemed to notice anything strange. The neighbors started complaining after a while. We had a couple come by one evening, asking if everything was okay because they had been hearing strange noises at night. They described it as scratching, shuffling noises like something was moving around in the walls. We brushed it off, thinking it was just old house noises. You know, the kind of thing that happens when a house settles. But then more neighbors came by with similar complaints. It made me uneasy, but we didn't have an answer. Max kept barking at that spot, and I could tell the kids were starting to get bothered by it. They were used to Max being quiet when we were home, but now it was like he couldn't settle. It felt like every time I walked into the living room, I'd see him there, eyes fixed on the floor, barking as if something was there, right under our feet. Then one afternoon, I came home to find Max gone. He had bolted out of the house when my wife opened the door to take out the trash. We had been worried about it happening eventually, but never thought it would happen in the middle of the day. I ran out, but there was no sign of him. I called his name for what felt like hours. Eventually, I saw him running back down the street toward the house, looking frantic. His fur was soaked with something, like he had been in water or mud, and he was shaking. We locked the doors and kept him inside after that. He wouldn't settle down. He just paced around the house, whining at the living room. My wife and I exchanged uneasy glances, both wondering what the hell was going on. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whole thing was starting to get to me. The barking, the neighbors' complaints, the fact that Max was acting so strange. It felt like there was something going on that we weren't seeing. I got up in the middle of the night, checked the doors, the windows, made sure everything was locked and secure. Then I heard it. Scratching. Soft at first, but getting louder, more frantic. It was coming from under the floor. I froze. I didn't know what it was at first, and I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was rats, I thought. Or maybe something got stuck in the walls. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept going. My mind started racing. What if it was something bigger? What if there was something down there? The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to figure out what was going on. I started lifting up the carpets and looking around the living room floor, trying to see if there was something under the boards. It wasn't much to go on, but I had to know. My wife helped, though I could tell she was nervous too. She didn't say much, but I could see it in her face. She was scared. Finally, after hours of looking, we found it. There was a section of the floor that seemed loose, almost as if it wasn't nailed down properly. We pried it up carefully. Beneath the floorboards was a hole, a small space, barely big enough to fit your arm in. But what we found inside made my stomach churn. A metal latch. Old and rusty. Without saying anything, we pulled it open. The smell hit us first, a sour, musty, decaying smell. It made me gag. Then we saw it, a crawl space, covered in dust and old, decaying insulation. The walls were filthy, like it had been untouched for years. We didn't even think twice before we grabbed a flashlight and crawled inside. What we found inside, though, still haunts me. It wasn't big, but it was enough to give us a glimpse of what had been hidden in that house for who knows how long. There were old items scattered everywhere, clothes, papers, even a torn-up mattress. But the worst part was the pictures. Pictures of families. Of kids. Of people I didn't recognize. They were scattered all over the floor, like someone had been keeping them hidden down there. It didn't make sense. Who would put something like that under the house? What was this person doing here before us? But the worst part, the one thing I can't get out of my mind, is what we found behind the mattress. Something wrapped in plastic. I thought it was just more old junk, but when we unwrapped it, we saw it. A baby's shoe. Small, old, and worn down, but it was still recognizable. It didn't belong to us. That's when it hit me. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just some old house noises or the dog being paranoid. Someone had been living in that crawl space before us. And they were still watching us. We called the police right after that. They took everything, combed through the crawl space, but they didn't find much more. There were no footprints, no trace of anyone actually living there recently. But the pictures, the shoe, they were enough for us to know we weren't dealing with something normal. After that, we moved out. It wasn't safe anymore. I still think about it sometimes, the scratching, the barking, the pictures. And I can't shake the thought that someone was down there, hidden, waiting for the right moment. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Just a place to crash for a few hours on our way to visit some family. We had been driving for hours, the road stretching out in front of us for miles and miles. It was late, maybe around 2 a.m., when we pulled into the motel. The place wasn't anything special, just an old, roadside spot with a neon sign that flickered in the night. But it was cheap, and at that point, we didn't care about much except getting some sleep. The man at the front desk was old and gruff. He didn't say much when he handed us the key, just pointed down the hallway to room 7. We got there, unpacked our things, and I took a quick shower while my partner set up the TV. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. It was just one of those places you stop at when you're too tired to care about anything else. We both crashed pretty quickly. The bed wasn't great, but I was so exhausted from the drive that I didn't really care. I remember I drifted off almost immediately, the sound of the air conditioning humming in the background. But then I woke up. I don't know what time it was, but something made me stir. At first, I thought it was just a noise from the street outside, maybe a car driving by or something. But then I heard it again, footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps on the floor. I didn't think much of it at first. It was probably my partner, maybe going to the bathroom or getting up to get a drink of water. But then the footsteps stopped, and the silence in the room was wrong. I could feel something was off, even though I didn't know what it was. I was lying there, trying to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched, of being not alone, was too strong. I turned my head toward my partner's side of the bed. He was still there, fast asleep. He hadn't moved, not a single inch. That's when it hit me, there was no reason for anyone else to be in the room. I lay there, still and wide awake, my heart starting to beat faster. The footsteps weren't just in my head. They had been real, and they had been close. Too close. I reached for the light switch on my nightstand. My fingers were shaking, but I flipped it on. The sudden light filled the room, and I blinked a few times, adjusting to it. The room was just as it had been when we went to bed. Everything was in place, nothing seemed disturbed. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then I heard it again. More footsteps. Closer this time. They were coming from the far side of the room, near the door. I turned toward it and froze. The door was still chained from the inside. There was no way anyone could have come in without us hearing them. I stared at the door, trying to make sense of what was happening. The chain was still locked, just as it had been when we entered. There was no way it could have been tampered with. But then I realized something. The footsteps. They were coming closer. The sound of someone pacing back and forth, as though they were waiting for something. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. Was there someone in the room? Had someone snuck in while we were sleeping? I slowly sat up in bed, careful not to wake my partner, though I wasn't sure why I was being so cautious. I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting, but something about the situation didn't feel right. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand, trying to keep my breathing quiet, but I couldn't stop the frantic thoughts racing through my mind. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest. The footsteps were getting louder. Closer. I had to know. I had to be sure. I couldn't just sit there in the dark, listening to someone walk around the room. I slowly slid out of bed, holding my phone in front of me, using the dim light of the screen to help me see. I walked quietly toward the door, trying to make as little noise as possible. I reached for the chain, feeling its cold metal beneath my fingers. It was still locked. I took a deep breath and peered through the peephole. There was no one. I could see the hallway, the dim light from the motel's neon sign outside filtering in, but there was no one there. No footsteps, no figure standing outside the door. I almost felt stupid. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the stress of the drive had caught up with me, and I was just imagining things. But then, just as I was about to turn back to the bed, I heard it again. The footsteps. And this time, they weren't coming from the door. They were coming from the other side of the room. I spun around, panic creeping into my chest. I couldn't see anything. There was no one there. But the footsteps kept getting louder, as though someone was moving around the room in the dark. My mind was racing. Where could they be? I had checked the door. I had looked through the peephole. I thought about waking my partner, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if it was just my imagination? I didn't want to freak him out. I didn't want him to think I was losing it. But then I heard something else. A scraping sound. It came from the corner of the room, by the window. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. I had no idea what was happening, but I knew I couldn't stay in that room much longer. I backed away from the door, moving slowly toward the bed. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck, the air in the room feeling thicker, somehow suffocating. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who or what was in the room with us. I grabbed my partner's arm, shaking him awake. He mumbled something, groggy from sleep, but I shook him harder, whispering, "We need to go. Now." He looked at me, still half asleep, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer. I just grabbed my bag and started heading toward the door. My heart was racing, and I could barely think straight. I didn't care anymore about looking stupid. I just needed to get out. I unlocked the door as quickly as I could, yanking the chain free, and pulled it open. We stepped out into the hallway, and I looked around frantically. The footsteps had stopped. I didn't know if I'd imagined the whole thing, if I'd been sleep deprived or just losing my mind. But when we got outside and I looked up at the motel, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been watching us the whole time. We didn't stay the night. We found another place to sleep, and by the time morning came, I tried to forget about it. But I couldn't. The memory of those footsteps, the way the door was still locked, still haunts me. I had been driving for what felt like forever. The road stretched out in front of me, endless and dark. I was making a cross-country trip, heading from the east coast to the west, and it was late, probably around 2 a.m. I had already been on the road for hours, my eyes tired and my body aching from sitting for so long. The only company I had was the radio, but even that started to feel like background noise after a while. I decided to stop at a rest area to stretch my legs and take a break. There was a gas station there, but the lights were off and the pumps were covered. The whole place looked deserted, but I needed to use the bathroom, and there was a sign pointing to it just off to the side. The bathroom was one of those small, old ones that you find at nearly every rest stop on the side of the highway, dingy and mostly unkempt, but it would do. The door to the bathroom wasn't locked, which I thought was odd. Usually, these places lock the doors at night to avoid anyone causing trouble or hanging around, but this one was wide open. I went in, relieved that I could at least get some rest from the driving. Everything felt normal enough. The air smelled musty, like old cleaning supplies and mildew, but it wasn't anything out of the ordinary for a public bathroom at a late hour. I used the facilities, washed my hands, and made sure to check my watch. I didn't want to waste too much time, still had a long way to go. I stepped out of the bathroom, the cold night air hitting me immediately. The parking lot was still empty, except for my car, which was parked a little ways back by the rest area. The only thing moving was the faint wind, rustling the leaves and creating small sounds in the distance. I turned to leave, but then something caught my eye. There was a car parked at the far end of the lot, away from all the other vehicles. It was just sitting there, headlights off, engine silent. The car was one of those older sedans, nondescript, nothing too special. But what stood out was the person in the driver's seat. I could see them clearly, even though the car was far enough away. They were just sitting there, not moving. I couldn't tell if they were looking at me, but the eerie stillness of the situation made my heart beat a little faster. Maybe it was nothing, maybe just someone else stopping for a break, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was way too late for someone to just be hanging around a rest stop like this. I stood there for a moment, frozen in place. My mind tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they were just tired, too, or maybe they were waiting for someone. But there was something about the way they didn't move, the way they just stared straight ahead, that made my skin crawl. It wasn't right. I quickly glanced back at the bathroom to make sure it was still clear, like I needed some reassurance that there was no one else around, and then I took a step toward my car. I felt my pulse quicken, a twinge of unease creeping up my spine. As I walked toward my car, I couldn't help but glance back at the sedan. The person was still there. Still sitting, not moving an inch. I fumbled for my keys in my pocket, my fingers trembling slightly. I didn't want to make eye contact, didn't want to do anything that would make them think I was paying too much attention to them, but I couldn't help myself. My eyes kept flicking back to that car, even as I reached the door to my own vehicle. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat, trying to ignore the feeling that someone was watching me. As soon as I shut the door, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I had somehow put distance between myself and whatever was out there. I wasn't sure why, but the thought of leaving felt safer than staying. But as I started the engine, my eyes instinctively went back to the sedan. The person was still in the driver's seat, still staring straight ahead. I tried to push it out of my mind. I told myself it was just some late-night traveler, maybe someone who fell asleep in the car while waiting for someone else. But something wasn't adding up. Why hadn't they moved? Why hadn't they left, especially since there was no one else around? The whole situation didn't sit right with me. I put the car in drive, hoping that the further I got from the rest area, the more I could forget about the person in that car. But as I drove off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I checked my rearview mirror. The sedan's headlights blinked on, and for a brief moment, I saw the car moving, slowly pulling out of the parking spot. The headlights reflected off the road in my mirror. I could feel my chest tighten as I watched the car follow me down the road. I had no idea if it was the same person from the car, but the timing was too suspicious. My mind raced. I tried to keep calm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I didn't want to speed, didn't want to make any sudden moves that would draw attention, but I had no choice but to drive faster. I could still see the headlights behind me in my mirror. They were close enough now that I could make out the outline of the car's front end. I didn't know if I was overreacting. Maybe they were just another traveler heading the same direction. But I couldn't ignore the unease building in the pit of my stomach. The car kept following me for what felt like miles, not speeding up or slowing down, just maintaining a steady pace behind me. I knew the road well enough, and I decided to make a sudden turn onto a side road. I had to see if they follow me off the main highway. As soon as I made the turn, I glanced in my mirror. The car did, too. I felt my heart race in my chest as the headlights of the sedan followed me down the narrow, dark road. I wasn't sure how long I could keep this up. I had no idea where I was or where I was going, just that I needed to get away. I made another turn and another, trying to lose them. The road was getting even more isolated. No streetlights, no houses, just trees and darkness. Eventually, I glanced in the mirror again. The headlights were gone. I didn't slow down for a long time after that. I kept driving, eyes darting from the rearview mirror to the road ahead. I never saw the sedan again, but the feeling of being followed never left me. When I finally pulled into the next town hours later, I found a well-lit, busy truck stop and parked right under the lights. I didn't feel safe until I saw other cars around me, people moving in and out of the store. Only then did the knot in my stomach loosen, even just a little. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't stopping at any more rest areas on that trip. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a couple of nights for work. I was traveling alone, and I'd been on the road for hours, exhausted from a long day of meetings. The hotel was nothing fancy, but it was clean enough and close to where I needed to be. I had already checked in at the front desk, got my room key, and was looking forward to some peace and quiet. When I walked into the room, everything seemed perfectly fine at first. The bed was neatly made, the TV was in the corner, and there was the usual hotel furniture, nothing unusual at all. I put my bag down and started to unpack, glad to be done with my day. But then, I noticed something odd. The room number on the phone didn't match the one on the door. The door had a small sign that read room 208, but the phone next to the bed said room 209. I thought it was a mistake, maybe just a mix-up when they put the phone in the room, but it struck me as strange. How could that kind of thing happen? It was the little things that always get under my skin, and this was definitely one of those little things. I shrugged it off at first. I wasn't in the mood to make a fuss over something so small. I was tired and just wanted to get some sleep. So, I reached for the phone to call the front desk and ask about it. I lifted the receiver and pressed the number for the front desk. It was supposed to be a simple call, but when I tried to dial, nothing happened. The line was completely dead. No dial tone, no static, just silence. I hung up and tried again, thinking maybe I didn't press hard enough. But the second time, nothing again. The line was completely out. Now I was getting a little annoyed. I mean, how could they leave a phone in the room that didn't work? I had a long day ahead of me tomorrow, and I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. I picked up my bag and decided to head down to the front desk to ask about it. Maybe they could switch rooms or something. But just before I left the room, something caught my eye. The door. I had noticed earlier that the door was a little off-center, but now it seemed even more wrong. There was a small gap at the bottom of the door, just enough for me to notice it. I bent down to look closer, and sure enough, I could see light spilling in from the hallway outside. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I was about to leave, but something made me pause. I don't know why, but I decided to check the lock on the door. When I twisted the handle, it felt a little too easy. There wasn't that familiar click that you get when the door is locked. I twisted it again, and sure enough, it was completely unlocked. The deadbolt was engaged, but I realized then that the handle hadn't been locked properly at all. I was starting to feel a little paranoid at this point. I locked the door, making sure it clicked into place, and turned around to get my things together. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I started pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down. It wasn't like me to get so worked up over small details, but I couldn't ignore the nagging sensation that something wasn't right. I decided to give the front desk another try. I picked up the phone again, and this time, I held it a little longer, hoping the line would work. But again, nothing. The phone line was completely dead. I felt my stomach drop as a strange tension built up inside me. It felt like I was trapped, like I couldn't get in touch with anyone, and I couldn't leave. Something made me turn back to the door again. I didn't know why, but I walked over and placed my ear against it, listening for any sound from the hallway outside. I could hear the faint hum of a vending machine and the muffled sound of people talking, but nothing that stood out. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. I turned to face the room and noticed the window. It was cracked open slightly, enough to let in a bit of cool air. It wasn't much, but it felt like something out of place. I went to close it, but before I could reach it, I heard a sound. A knock. Light, but sharp. I froze. It came from the other side of the door. I didn't move at first. Maybe it was just someone in the hallway, a guest who needed something. But the knock came again, this time harder, more insistent. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. My mind raced. Who could it be? I hadn't ordered anything, and I hadn't asked for room service. It didn't make sense. I felt an overwhelming urge to look through the peephole, but a part of me didn't want to. I didn't want to see who was on the other side, but I couldn't help myself. I walked over slowly and peered through the small circle in the door. I couldn't see anything at first, just a dimly lit hallway. But then, I caught a glimpse of something. There was a shadow moving in the hallway, just outside the range of my view. I stepped back from the door, my heart racing. What the hell was going on? I grabbed my phone and tried to call the front desk again. No luck. I dialed the emergency number, but still nothing. The line was completely dead. Panic started to set in. I could feel it rising in my chest, my breath quickening. I stepped back from the door, looking around the room for anything I could use as a weapon, just in case. There was nothing. Just the usual hotel furniture, nothing to protect myself with. The knocking came again. This time, it was louder. The kind of knock that made me feel like someone was trying to get in. I didn't know who it was, or what they wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I backed away from the door, trying to calm myself down. I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't know if it was a mistake or some strange coincidence, but I didn't care. I wasn't staying there another second. I grabbed my things and bolted out of the room, making sure to lock the door behind me. I didn't even look back. I didn't want to see anything else. I made my way downstairs to the lobby, my heart still pounding in my chest. The front desk was still empty. No one was there. The only thing I could hear was the hum of the lights above me. I looked around, feeling more isolated than I had ever felt. I don't know how long I stood there before the receptionist finally showed up. She was surprised to see me. I told her what happened to the phone, the locked door, the knocking, and she seemed confused. She said the room was fine, that everything was normal. But when I asked about the phone number mismatch and the dead phone line, she just shrugged. That happens sometimes, she said, as though it was no big deal. But I knew better. I never went back to that room. I requested a new one, far away from that part of the hotel, and made sure everything worked properly. I didn't sleep much that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the door, the phone, and the knock. Something wasn't right. And I wasn't staying to find out what it was. I've always enjoyed running early in the morning. There's something peaceful about it, the way the world feels so quiet and still. I'm not the type to sleep in, so I get up at around 5 a.m., throw on my sneakers, and hit the trail near my house. The sun's just beginning to rise, and everything feels like it's just mine for a little while. No distractions, no one else around. It's my time to clear my head before the day starts. This particular morning, everything was as usual. I left my house a little before sunrise, and the trail was empty, just how I liked it. The air was crisp, and the coolness felt nice against my skin as I ran along. It's not a long trail, maybe a couple of miles, but it's quiet and secluded, with trees lining the sides and a few benches here and there. Nothing fancy, just a place to escape. About halfway through my run, I saw a man ahead of me. He was standing off to the side of the trail, stretching his legs. I didn't think much of it at first. People often stop to stretch or warm up before running, especially in the mornings. I passed by him without even slowing down, just a quick glance in his direction as I continued my jog. He looked normal, just stretching his hamstrings, wearing a gray hoodie and black shorts. Nothing out of the ordinary. I kept going, thinking nothing of it, focusing on my pace. The sound of my feet hitting the gravel and the rhythm of my breathing filled my head. It was all routine, peaceful. When I reached the end of the trail, I turned around to head back the way I came. But when I came back around the bend and past the same spot, I saw him again. He was still there, in the exact same spot, still stretching, his legs in the same position as before. His arms reached down toward his foot, just like when I first passed him. It didn't immediately seem strange. Maybe he was just taking his time, I thought. Some people like to stretch for a long time, especially if they're preparing for a longer run. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the fact that he was stretching for so long, but how he was doing it. He hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't shifted his position. It was as if he was frozen, stuck in that same exact stretch. I felt a little uneasy, but I didn't want to overreact. I just kept my pace, trying to push the thought out of my mind. I mean, people stretch at different paces, right? So, I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then something else struck me. I hadn't heard him move at all. I couldn't hear him breathing, no shuffling of feet, no stretching sounds. It was as if he was completely still. I tried not to stare. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but the feeling of discomfort kept growing. As I jogged past him, I gave him another glance. He was still there, his head down, still in the same stretch. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just being weird. But my legs felt heavier now, like I was dragging myself along the trail. I wanted to get to the end of the path and be done with it. The trail seemed longer than it had been on the way out, and I could feel the tension in my chest growing. My usual peaceful run was turning into something that felt wrong. I reached the end of the trail again and turned around. I told myself I was just imagining things, that everything was fine. But my stomach twisted, and I couldn't help but look up ahead as I ran back. And sure enough, there he was. Still in the same spot. Still in that stretch. He hadn't moved. Not a single inch. I had a moment of complete panic. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I didn't want to look at him, but I couldn't help myself. My eyes were glued to him as I approached, almost as if my body was telling me to be aware of something I couldn't see. I felt my heart rate pick up. I couldn't tell if he was watching me or if his head was still facing down toward his foot. I couldn't hear him breathing. He was just still. Completely still. I knew something was wrong. I picked up my pace, now desperate to get away from him, but I couldn't help but glance at him one more time as I passed. And that's when I saw it. His head. It was no longer down. He was looking directly at me. His eyes were fixed on mine. I felt a chill run through my entire body. It wasn't just that he was staring, it was the way he was staring. It wasn't like a casual glance. It was as if he was waiting for something. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was terrifying. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my breath came out in quick bursts. I turned the corner quickly, now almost sprinting. I didn't look back. As I ran the rest of the way to the end of the trail, all I could think was that I needed to get out of there as quickly as possible. I didn't know why, but I felt like if I stopped running, something bad would happen. I reached the end of the trail, turned, and headed straight home, never once looking back. As I passed my neighborhood's entrance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, even though I didn't hear anyone behind me. I glanced over my shoulder once, half expecting to see him there, but there was no one. Still, the anxiety gnawed at me. I got home, locked the door behind me, and didn't leave the house the rest of the day. I didn't go back to the trail for days. When I finally did, I didn't see the man again, but I couldn't forget the look in his eyes. I know it sounds strange. He was probably just stretching, maybe a little too long, but there was something about him, something about how still he was, that has stuck with me. It still bothers me every time I go out for a run. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe on that trail again. The whole thing felt wrong, and I can't help but wonder if I was just being paranoid. But after that day, every time I jog past that spot, I can't stop myself from glancing over my shoulder, just to make sure he's not there. I moved to the city about 6 months ago. It was a big change for me, and honestly, I wasn't fully prepared for how different everything would be. But I thought I was ready. I'd always wanted to live in a big city, to experience the hustle, the energy of it all. The apartment I found wasn't the nicest, but it was cheap, and that was all that mattered at the time. It was on a quieter street, tucked in between other buildings, and it had a small, almost hidden back alley where the dumpsters were. The alley didn't get much traffic, and it was far enough from the main road that I felt comfortable taking out my trash at night without worrying about being seen. One night, a few weeks after moving in, I took out the trash around 10 p.m. The weather had been nice, and there was a slight breeze. I felt the kind of calm you get when you're alone in a city that's still alive but quiet enough for you to think. I walked around the corner to the dumpster, tossing the bag in, when something caught my eye. It was a small, black notebook wedged between some discarded cardboard boxes. It looked old but not dirty, like it had been carefully placed there. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe someone had dropped it. But something about it felt strange, like it didn't belong. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to just leave it or take it inside. Curiosity won, and I picked it up. I glanced around, half expecting someone to be watching, but the alley was empty. So, I flipped it open. The first few pages were blank, just regular notebook pages. But as I turned further into it, my stomach twisted. The notes were handwritten. The writing wasn't neat, but it wasn't messy either. It looked like someone had taken their time, like they wanted to make sure the words came out right. The first entry was short. She took the bus at 8:30 this morning. Stopped at the cafe for a coffee. Didn't stay long. Left at 9:15. I froze. My stomach dropped. I glanced at the date written under it, March 3rd. That was 2 days ago. I didn't know what to think. The next page had more details. She was wearing the blue jacket again. Took the usual route home. Stopped at the convenience store to buy snacks. Didn't speak to anyone. Again, I froze. That was me. I always wore that blue jacket, and I always took the same route home from work. It was uncanny. But there had to be a mistake. It had to be someone else. I kept flipping through the pages. Each one seemed to follow my movements. The entries were getting more specific, more unsettling. She's been avoiding eye contact today. Walked past the park without stopping like she usually does. She didn't talk to the cashier at the deli. Got her usual sandwich and walked out. She's been looking around a lot today. Keeps checking behind her when she walks. My heart was pounding now. I felt a cold sweat forming on my skin. This wasn't normal. This was too precise. Too personal. These notes were about me. But who was writing them? And how did they know all of this? I kept flipping through the pages, unable to stop myself. She went out to the alley again last night. took out the trash, stayed there a little longer than usual. Seems like she's getting comfortable. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. The notebook felt heavier in my hands, and my breathing was shallow. I couldn't just stand there. I had to get back inside, but I couldn't take my eyes off the notebook. The last entry sent a chill down my spine. She's starting to notice me. She looks over her shoulder too often. But she doesn't know I'm here. Not yet. I couldn't breathe. I looked around, but the alley was still empty. The streetlights were flickering slightly, casting long shadows. I felt like I was being watched, like someone was standing just out of sight, waiting. I snapped the notebook shut, my hands shaking. I didn't know what to do. I should have thrown it away, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave it there. I went back to my apartment as fast as I could, holding the notebook tight against my chest like it was some kind of evidence. When I got inside, I locked the door behind me and slid the bolt. I went straight to the kitchen table and laid the notebook down, staring at it. I tried to tell myself it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe someone had found an old notebook and was writing about someone else. But the fact that it mentioned specific things about my routine, things that no one would know unless they were following me, made my skin crawl. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the notebook, about how someone had been tracking me. Had they seen me take the trash out tonight? Were they watching me now? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was outside my window, just waiting for the right moment. The next morning, I checked the alley again. The notebook was gone. The dumpster was the same, but the spot where I had found it was empty. There was no sign of it. But it didn't help. It didn't make me feel better. It only made me more anxious. For the next few days, I kept expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was always just out of sight. I couldn't concentrate at work. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about what that last note said. She looks over her shoulder too often. She doesn't know I'm here. It's been weeks since I found the notebook, and I still don't know who wrote it or how they knew so much about me. I haven't seen anyone watching me, but I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there. I still double-check the alley before I take the trash out, and I never stay in the same spot for too long. I've stopped walking at night, and I don't take my usual route anymore. I don't know if the person who wrote the notes is still nearby, or if they've moved on. But I can't forget those words. She doesn't know I'm here. And I wonder if I ever really did. I don't know what got into me that day. I'd been driving around the neighborhood, just aimlessly, trying to clear my head after a long week at work. It was a Saturday morning, and the sun was out, making everything feel a little bit brighter than usual. I wasn't expecting much. I didn't have any errands to run. I was just out there because I had nothing better to do. That's when I saw the yard sale. It was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind where all the houses looked the same. There was an old, rickety sign hanging in front that said everything must go, and a few folding tables with random odds and ends spread out on them. Old books, clothes, a few pieces of furniture. Nothing too remarkable. But there, tucked in the corner of the driveway, was an old freezer. It wasn't anything special at first glance. It was just a white, standing freezer, the kind that probably hadn't been used in years. The type that sat in a garage or a basement, gathering dust. But something about it caught my eye. I don't know why. I just couldn't look away. I walked up to it and asked the woman sitting by the table if it was for sale. She looked up at me, squinting against the sunlight. Yeah, I'm just trying to get rid of everything. It's an old freezer, but it still works. My husband's had it for years, but we don't need it anymore. I should have asked more questions. I should have thought about it for longer. But I didn't. I didn't want to think. I just wanted something new, something interesting. Something to break the monotony. I asked how much, and she said $20. $20. I didn't even hesitate. I paid her in cash, and she told me it had been unplugged for a few days, so I shouldn't have to worry about anything inside. I loaded it into the back of my truck, and I drove home, feeling that kind of odd excitement you get when you're about to do something a little reckless. A new piece of furniture. A new project. Something to take my mind off of everything. I set it in my garage and went inside to grab a few tools. The freezer had this metal latch, and it looked like the kind that would seal tightly, so I figured it might take a bit of muscle to open. It wasn't until I was standing there, holding the crowbar, that I realized something was off. The latch. It was old, rusted, but more than that, it was sealed. Completely sealed. It didn't budge. I tried pushing and pulling on it for a while, but it wouldn't open. There was no way it was supposed to be like this. Not after sitting in a yard sale, not after being in that woman's driveway for who knows how long. Curiosity took over. I shouldn't have been so eager to get it open, but something about that freezer, about the way it was sealed shut, made me feel like I had to know what was inside. I put my weight into it, using the crowbar to wedge between the lid and the body of the freezer. The rusted metal groaned. It felt like it had been years since anyone had even attempted to open it. I managed to pry the lid open just enough to get a good grip, and that's when the smell hit me. I can't even explain it. It wasn't like anything I've ever smelled before. It was thick, rancid, almost sickening. Like old meat left to rot for days, or worse, weeks. I gagged and stumbled back, nearly tripping over my feet. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt dizzy for a second, like the room was spinning. The smell clung to the inside of my nostrils, and I knew, without a doubt, I shouldn't have opened it. But it was too late. I couldn't just walk away now. I forced myself to lean in, squinting through the faint light in the garage. It was dark inside the freezer, and for a second, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But when I looked closer, I saw something. Something wrapped in plastic. I don't know why I didn't turn away then. Maybe I was in shock, or maybe I just couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I grabbed a flashlight from the shelf and shone it inside. The light flickered a little, casting long shadows inside. The plastic that was wrapped around whatever was inside looked torn, frayed. It was clear now, though, what it was. Or at least, I thought I knew what it was. The plastic was covering a large mass, a human-sized shape. The hair on my neck stood up. I felt my throat tighten. I stepped back, my pulse racing. I wanted to slam the lid shut and pretend like I hadn't seen anything. But my hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop myself from looking again. I could see it more clearly now. The shape wasn't just a lump. It was a person. At least, it had been. A body, long since decomposed, wrapped tightly in plastic. I could barely make out the shape of what looked like limbs, but the skin, if you could call it skin, was mottled and dark. The smell was worse now, overwhelming, suffocating. I could taste it in the back of my throat. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but I finally snapped out of it. My mind raced. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I should call the police or just run. I had to get out of the garage. I had to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. The sight of that body, that, whatever it was, had me paralyzed. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the freezer, and ran inside. I slammed the garage door behind me and locked it. I didn't even know what I was supposed to do next. What if the woman at the yard sale knew about this? What if she was involved? Or was it just some sick joke? I couldn't make sense of it, and I didn't want to. I left the house, got in my truck, and drove to the police station. I didn't tell anyone about the freezer, about what I saw. I just said I found something that didn't belong in my garage, and I needed help. The officers were understanding, though they looked at me with confusion when I told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to check it out. When they got to my house, they said it was nothing more than a prank. Someone had probably stuffed a mannequin or something inside to make it look real. I didn't believe them. I couldn't. They never told me exactly what was inside, but I knew what I saw. After that, I sold the freezer. I couldn't keep it. I couldn't even look at it again. I still wonder who put that body in there. Why they chose my freezer, why they left it in the yard sale. But I'll never know. All I know is that I shouldn't have opened it. I shouldn't have let my curiosity get the best of me. And I still can't forget the smell. It haunts me every time I walk into my garage. We had just come back from a long weekend getaway, and it felt good to be home. The drive back had been peaceful, the weather perfect for a road trip. We were both excited to settle back into our usual routine. When we pulled up to the house, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The grass was a bit longer than we'd left it, but that was expected. We had a neighbor who would mow it occasionally, but she hadn't been by while we were gone. Still, everything seemed normal. We grabbed our bags from the car, walked up the steps, and I fumbled for my keys. I unlocked the door, and as soon as we walked inside, I noticed something strange. It wasn't anything too obvious at first, but it caught my eye right away. The house seemed quieter. Like the air was different, thicker. I didn't think much of it though. We'd been away for 3 days. Maybe it was just the silence settling in after the noise of the road trip. But then, I noticed the photos on the wall. We had pictures all over the place, family photos, snapshots from vacations, a few random pictures from parties and gatherings. We had one above the fireplace of us on our honeymoon, one of my wife and me at her sister's wedding, and a few candid shots scattered around the living room. They were all gone. Instead, every single photo on the walls had been replaced. The new pictures were black and white portraits of strangers. I remember feeling my chest tighten right then. My first thought was that maybe someone had broken in and decided to rearrange everything. But that didn't make sense. The house was locked. We had double-checked everything before we left, like we always do. I turned to my wife, but she looked just as confused as I felt. She walked over to the nearest picture frame and picked it up. The photo was of an older couple, dressed in formal clothes. They didn't look familiar at all, and they definitely weren't anyone in our family. I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What the hell?" she muttered, setting the frame back down on the table. I started walking through the house, checking every room. In the hallway, there was a picture of a young man, probably in his 20s, standing in front of what looked like an old farm. He was smiling, but it was a stiff smile, not a natural one. It was like one of those forced smiles you give for a school picture. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't recognize any of the other people in the frames either. The photos weren't the only thing off. When I got to our bedroom, I noticed the bed was made differently. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but it wasn't how we left it. The sheets were tucked in too neatly, almost too perfectly. Everything in the room felt out of place. Even the little things, like the pillows on the bed or the way the bathroom towels were folded. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding now. I didn't know what to think. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but nothing made sense. I checked the back door and the windows. They were locked. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of the ordinary. Then I went to the front door. There was nothing unusual about it either, except for the doormat being slightly askew, as if someone had stepped on it after we left. But even that wasn't enough to say that someone had been here. I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I could feel the tension in the air, like a knot in my stomach that I couldn't undo. I picked up my phone and called the police, though I felt foolish doing it. It just didn't seem like there was any evidence of a break-in, and I wasn't sure if it was even necessary. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photos. And the strange feeling that hung over the house, like someone had been here, touching everything, but then quickly left before they were noticed. The officer who came to the house was friendly enough. He asked a lot of questions about our trip, when we left, when we came back, and if we had noticed anything strange. We told him about the pictures, how all our family photos had been replaced, and how there were no signs of forced entry. He seemed skeptical but said he would look around anyway. He didn't find anything either. No fingerprints, no signs that anyone had broken in, no signs of anything being touched. But he agreed that it was odd. He suggested we change the locks just in case, and left us with a report to file if anything else turned up. That was it. No explanation, no answers. Just a lot of confusion and unease. We spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what had happened. My wife kept looking through the pictures, trying to see if any of the people in the photos looked familiar. There was nothing. Nothing connected the people in those pictures to us. Some of them were older, some younger, but none of them resembled any relatives, any friends, or anyone we knew. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought, the more unsettled I became. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like a place we were just occupying. It was as though someone else had lived here, or maybe was still living here. I checked the photos again, just to be sure, but the more I stared at them, the less real they felt. It was like I was looking at something from a dream, something that didn't belong to me. Or worse, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A few days went by, and the feeling never left. Every time I walked through the house, I kept expecting to see the photos change again, like someone was still messing with us. But they stayed the same. The strangers in the pictures never changed, no matter how much I stared at them. No matter how many times I tried to make sense of it. We never found out who replaced the photos or why it happened. No one admitted to it. We never got any answers. But I'll never forget the feeling of walking into my house and not recognizing it anymore. It was like everything we had was taken, and what was left didn't belong to us. And even now, I sometimes wonder if we were ever meant to live there in the first place. I was driving home after a long day at work. It had been one of those exhausting, mind-numbing days where every minute felt like an hour. I was on a remote stretch of highway, miles away from any towns or lights, and I was just trying to push through the final leg of the drive. It was getting late, the sky was dark, and there was nothing but endless road ahead of me. I was tired, my eyes were heavy, but I knew I just needed to get home and crash for the night. As I was driving, I noticed something up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I got closer, I could make out the figure of a woman standing by the side of the road. She was wearing a long coat, and her hair was dark, almost blending in with the night. She was standing there, completely still, looking at me as I approached. I slowed down, my foot hovering over the brake, trying to decide what to do. It was strange. There was no one else around. No houses. No other cars. Just a woman. And the more I thought about it, the more it felt off. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the thought that maybe she was in trouble. I don't know why I stopped. I guess I've seen enough stories about people needing help in the middle of nowhere, so against my better judgment, I pulled over. Maybe I just wanted to feel like a good person. Or maybe I was too tired to think clearly. Either way, I stopped. She didn't say anything as I rolled the window down. She just stood there, staring at me. I leaned out a little and asked, "You need a ride?" She nodded once, and that was it. No words. I didn't want to push it, so I unlocked the door, and she got in. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but there was something strange about her. She looked out of place, like she didn't belong there. She slid into the seat without a word, and I started driving again, trying to keep my focus on the road. I wasn't sure what to say, but I couldn't just drive in silence, could I? "So, where are you headed?" I asked, glancing over at her briefly. She didn't respond. I waited for a second, expecting anything, but nothing came. It was just her sitting there, staring ahead through the windshield. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to push aside the weirdness of the situation. I stole another glance at her, but her expression didn't change. It was like she was frozen, almost too still for a living person. I shook my head, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe she was exhausted, or maybe she was just one of those quiet people. It didn't make much sense, but I kept driving, trying to focus on getting her to wherever she needed to go. The ride felt longer than it should have. I kept checking the rearview mirror every now and then, just to make sure everything was okay. But each time I looked, she hadn't moved. Her posture was unnerving. She sat up straight, her hands folded in her lap, and there was no sign that she was even breathing. I glanced in the mirror again after a few minutes of silence, trying to make out her features. I couldn't see much in the dark, but I noticed her reflection in the mirror looked wrong. Her face was too still, her eyes too wide. I felt a little cold sweat run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. I turned to look at her, my voice a little uneasy now. "You okay?" Still no answer. She hadn't moved a muscle, and it was starting to freak me out. I didn't know what to think. It was like she wasn't even there. It was like she was a mannequin, just sitting there with no life in her. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that something was terribly wrong. The silence in the car was deafening. I couldn't take it anymore. "Hey," I said again, my voice a little louder this time. "Where are you headed?" No response. I checked the rearview mirror again, expecting to see her staring back at me. But when I glanced up, the back seat was empty. Completely empty. My heart dropped into my stomach. I slammed on the brakes, the car jerking to a stop on the side of the road. My hand shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I turned around, eyes wide, frantically scanning the back seat. There was nothing. No trace of her. Nothing at all. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I sat there, my mind racing. I had seen her get into the car. I had seen her clearly, right there in the seat next to me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't hallucinating. She had been there, but now there was nothing. I looked out of the window, hoping she had just gotten out somehow without me noticing, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The road stretched out into the darkness, and the headlights illuminated nothing but emptiness. I slowly put the car in reverse and backed up a little, scanning the side of the road. Nothing. No sign of her anywhere. I couldn't believe it. I had picked her up. She had been sitting right there. I had spoken to her, or at least tried to. And now she was just gone. Vanished. Like she had never existed. I stayed there for a few moments, just staring at the empty road in front of me, my pulse still racing. I was too scared to move, too scared to get out and look around. The air felt thick, like something was wrong, like something was just waiting to happen. Eventually, I started driving again, faster this time, not caring about the speed limit. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I drove the rest of the way home with my hands clenched tight on the steering wheel, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how many times I thought about it, no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't stop thinking about how she had looked, how she had sat there without saying a word, and how she had disappeared without a trace. I haven't been able to drive that stretch of road since. Every time I pass it, I feel that same chill run down my spine. And I don't know who she was, or where she went, but I know one thing for sure: I'll never stop to pick up a hitchhiker again. I had just moved into the house a couple of weeks before. It was a small, older place in the suburbs, nothing fancy, but it had a lot of character. It was a perfect fit for me at the time, affordable and quiet. The kind of place you don't expect anything weird to happen. Of course, I was wrong about that. One night, it was late. I had been working all day, then grabbed some takeout and sat down to watch a movie. It had been a long, tiring week, and I was trying to unwind. I had finished eating, tossed the empty takeout box in the trash, and went back to the living room to finish the movie. The house was quiet. Too quiet, actually. The kind of silence that feels like it's pressing in on you. It wasn't something that usually bothered me, but on this night, it felt strange. I paused the movie to grab my phone from the coffee table. I remember it was about 11:30 p.m. when I heard it. The faint sound of knocking. It was soft at first, almost like someone tapping on the wall or the ceiling, but then it became louder. I froze, unsure whether I had heard it or not. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was the house settling, or a pipe knocking in the walls. That was normal, right? Houses creak, they make sounds. But this wasn't just creaking. This was rhythmic knocking. Slow, deliberate. It came from downstairs. From the basement. I've been in that basement once since I moved in, just to check it out. It wasn't much, a few old boxes, some leftover furniture, and the usual basement junk. But it was dark, and it felt empty. There was nothing down there I needed, so I had stayed away since. The knocking came again. It was a little louder this time. I swallowed hard and stood up. My feet felt heavy as I made my way toward the stairs. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to check. Maybe there was something down there. Maybe it was just a weird sound from the house itself, but I had to know. I walked down the hall, my breath getting heavier as I got closer to the basement door. The door was made of solid wood, the kind you usually see in old homes. It had one of those old-fashioned brass handles, which you could pull up to open. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever might be down there. I wasn't scared, but I didn't exactly feel calm either. I just needed to figure out what was going on. I reached the door and paused, listening. The knocking had stopped. It was quiet again, but the silence now felt worse than the sound. Slowly, I reached for the handle and turned it. The door creaked open, and I stepped into the dark hallway. I could see the faint outline of the stairs leading down into the basement, but there was no light down there. Just shadows. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but there was nothing. No movement, no sounds. The only thing I could hear was the slight hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had just imagined the whole thing. Maybe the knocking wasn't from the basement at all. I had been working late. Maybe I was just tired. I took another step forward, peering into the dark, but I couldn't see anything. I turned back toward the stairs, about to close the door. It had to be nothing. Maybe it was my imagination playing tricks on me. I was halfway up the stairs when it happened. The door slammed shut. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the house settling. Someone had just slammed that door. I spun around quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the blood rush to my face. I ran back to the door and grabbed the handle, pulling with all my strength, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. I hadn't locked it. I was sure of that. I'd left it unlocked when I opened it to go down. I pulled harder, trying to force the door open, but it wouldn't budge. I could feel my pulse in my ears now, the panic starting to rise. It was like the door was sealed shut, as if something on the other side was keeping me in. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just the silence. I stepped back from the door, my mind racing. How could the door lock like that? There was no way the door had just locked by itself. I couldn't explain it. Maybe someone had locked it from the inside? But that made no sense. The basement was empty. The house was empty. I had been alone since moving in. I ran back to the stairs, trying to think. There was no way out of that basement unless I somehow managed to break down the door or find another way. But there was no other way out. The door to the outside was on the second floor, and I'd be damned if I was going to try and climb out a window at this hour. I stood there, my breath coming in sharp gasps, looking at the locked door. I felt like I was losing control of the situation. My thoughts were jumbled, my hands trembling as I tried to think of what to do next. Every minute I stood there felt like an eternity. The darkness felt like it was closing in on me. I knew I couldn't stay like this for long. I couldn't just stand there, helpless. But what if I opened the door? What if someone or something was waiting on the other side? That thought made my stomach churn. I tried the door again. It was locked, and it wouldn't budge. I slammed my shoulder against it, hoping to break it open, but it barely moved. I cursed under my breath, stepping back and breathing heavily. Then, I heard something. A soft shuffle from downstairs. It sounded like footsteps on the wooden floor. It was so faint, I wasn't sure if it was real or if my mind was just playing tricks on me. But I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I ran back up the stairs, my pulse racing. I needed to get out of there. I didn't care about the door anymore. I needed to leave, to get some space. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but the line went dead. At that moment, I didn't know what was worse, the idea of being trapped in the basement or the feeling that someone or something had been down there all along. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was just my mind getting the better of me or if there was something real behind that door. But whatever it was, I didn't feel safe anymore. I moved out of the house 2 days later. I couldn't take it anymore. I never went back to the basement. And every time I think about it, I can't help but wonder if someone was watching me from the other side of that door. I've always been pretty independent. I don't scare easily, and I've never had much trouble going places on my own, even late at night. I live in a fairly quiet neighborhood, and the grocery store I usually go to is just down the road. Nothing to it. I had been to that store countless times before, and I always liked the familiarity of it. The layout, the same faces behind the counter. It was my place, you know? That day started like any other. I had a few things on my list, some bread, vegetables, fruit, the usual. It wasn't anything special. I went in around 6 p.m., figuring it would be quiet enough that I could just get in and out quickly. The store wasn't too busy, so I went down the aisles, grabbing what I needed without any real distractions. Everything seemed fine until I noticed him. I saw him briefly at the end of one of the aisles, standing by the canned goods. He wasn't doing anything weird, just looking at the labels, but it was strange how he didn't seem to notice me at first. I figured I was just imagining things, so I moved on, grabbing some tomatoes. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I noticed him again. He was a couple of aisles over, but his position seemed to mirror mine. I'd walked to the next aisle, and when I looked up, he was right there, just a few steps behind me, his head turned toward the shelves, his attention focused on whatever was in front of him. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. He was just shopping, like everyone else. But it started to feel off. Every time I looked up, he was there. Just a few steps behind, walking at the same pace I was. I'd turn down another aisle, and somehow, he'd be right there again. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just overthinking it. It's not like I was the only one at the store. But the more I saw him, the more I started to feel like I wasn't imagining things. I decided to test it. I turned down an aisle I didn't need to go down just to see if he'd follow. Sure enough, when I glanced over my shoulder, he was there. This time, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It was getting harder to ignore the fact that this wasn't normal. I kept walking, now making a conscious effort to move faster. My heart rate sped up, and I could feel the sweat building on the back of my neck. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but it was starting to feel like I was being stalked, followed in some way. I tried to tell myself that it was just coincidence, that maybe he was just a guy doing his shopping, and it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was different. I made my way to the checkout line, my hand shaking slightly as I placed my items on the conveyor belt. I turned, trying to find him in the aisles, but I couldn't see him anymore. Maybe I had lost him. I hoped so. I told myself I was just being overly anxious. As I was paying, I glanced to my left, and there he was standing right behind me at the next register, just a few feet away. His eyes were fixed on me, not in any obvious or aggressive way, but in a way that made my skin crawl. He didn't smile, didn't greet me, just stood there, looking like he was waiting for something. I quickly turned away, paid for my groceries, and grabbed the bags, trying not to make eye contact. I told myself I'd just get to my car and everything would be fine. I was being ridiculous. People follow each other in stores all the time, right? But as I stepped outside, there he was again. A few steps behind, walking at the same pace as me. Not too fast, not too slow. Just behind, like he was mirroring my every move. I felt the familiar knot in my stomach, but now it was different. Now, I could feel the anxiety building, pressing down on me, like I couldn't breathe properly. I wanted to turn around, ask him what his deal was, but I couldn't. It felt wrong. So, I kept walking faster, hoping that maybe if I just ignored him, he would go away. I reached my car, unlocked it, and quickly slid into the driver's seat. But before I could close the door, I looked up and saw him standing a few feet away. He wasn't looking at me, but his face seemed familiar. My heart raced again, and I couldn't place why. I'd never seen him before, or at least I didn't think I had. I started the car and backed out of my spot, and as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw him again. He hadn't moved. He was still standing in the same spot, staring right at me. I drove home as fast as I could, my mind racing. It wasn't until I pulled into my driveway that I finally took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting, I told myself. Maybe I just needed to relax. But even as I walked up to my door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next day, I went to a different store for my groceries, hoping to forget about what happened. I didn't want to think about it too much. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that it was all just a coincidence. But when I walked into that store and passed by the aisles, I saw him again. He was standing at the end of an aisle, his back to me, but I could see him clearly. It was him. The same man. I froze for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no way. This couldn't be happening. I quickly ducked down another aisle, trying to calm myself. But when I looked again, he was right there, a few steps behind me, exactly like the day before. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my cart and started heading for the exit. I felt like I was going to collapse. My mind was racing, but there was no rational explanation for this. This wasn't just coincidence. It was too deliberate. I didn't even look back as I hurried through the checkout, paid for my things as fast as I could, and ran out to my car. I had to get away. I just had to get away. I had no idea what he wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I was being followed, and I wasn't safe. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me, or if it was the fact that I had seen him before, but I knew I couldn't go back to that store. And the thought of seeing him again made me feel like I was losing control. I didn't know what he wanted, but I was starting to fear that I might never be left alone. It started on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just gotten home from work, and it was one of those days where everything felt off. You know, when nothing specific happens, but you can feel something is just wrong. It was late afternoon, and I was standing outside my front door when I noticed the key on the ground. At first, I thought it might have fallen out of my bag or some pocket, but I quickly realized it wasn't mine. It was an old-fashioned key, silver with some intricate designs on the handle. I didn't recognize it, and it wasn't like the ones I used for my apartment. It looked like it belonged to a house, not an apartment complex. The thought that it had somehow fallen out of my bag was ridiculous, but I bent down to pick it up anyway. The moment my fingers touched it, I felt a strange sensation run through me, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I stared at the key for a few moments, my mind trying to make sense of it. Maybe it belonged to the neighbors, I thought. But even so, why would it be on the ground right outside my door? My neighbors were a bit older, and I couldn't imagine them dropping something like that, let alone leaving it there. I stood there for a while, feeling silly for even worrying about it. I put the key in my pocket and went inside. That evening, I tried to push it out of my mind. I made myself dinner, did some work, and then sat down to watch a little TV. The whole time, though, the thought of that key nagged at me, like it was somehow meant to be a warning. I kept glancing toward the door, almost expecting someone to come knocking. But nothing happened. The night went by quietly. Around midnight, I was in bed, almost asleep, when I heard it. The sound of a door handle being rattled. I froze, heart racing. My first thought was that it was some kind of animal, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. But then I remembered I hadn't heard any scratching, just the rattling of the door handle, like someone was trying to get in. My pulse quickened. I didn't move, just listened. It was faint, but it was there. The handle rattled again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was that I had to check it out. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the front door. I had this awful feeling in my gut, like something wasn't right. It wasn't a burglar, I didn't think. It wasn't even an accident. Whoever was out there, they were trying to get in. I peered through the peephole. The hallway outside was dark. I didn't see anyone. The sound of the rattling had stopped, but the feeling didn't go away. I waited a few minutes, listening for any movement, but nothing came. Slowly, I turned the deadbolt and opened the door. The night air hit me, cold and still. Nothing. No one in the hallway. But something caught something that made my heart leap into my throat. The key. The key I had found earlier, the one I didn't recognize, was now lying on the ground right in front of my door. I felt sick to my stomach. There was no way this was a coincidence. I picked it up, staring at it. It was the same key, the same design, but I was too shaken to figure out what to do with it. I turned it over in my hand, trying to make sense of it. Why had it been out there again? Why was it right in front of my door? And more importantly, why had I heard the rattling of the door handle just now? There was only one explanation that made sense, though it was the last thing I wanted to think about. Someone had been outside my door. Someone had been trying to get in. I tried to push the fear aside, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to do next, so I decided to lock the door again and go back to bed. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had been walking by and gotten confused, or maybe it was some prank. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The rattling had sounded too deliberate. I spent the rest of the night on edge, every little sound making my heart race. But no one came back. No one knocked. No more rattling. By the next morning, I was exhausted, but I had a job to do. I went to work, trying to keep my mind focused on other things. But even at work, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. I kept telling myself it was a fluke, that nothing had really happened, but deep down, I knew it wasn't true. Someone had been outside my door. That evening, I came home, feeling a mix of dread and anxiety. The sun had already set, and the street outside was quiet. I walked to my door, my hand shaking slightly as I put the key in the lock. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. The door handle rattled again. This time, I heard it clearly, from the inside. I froze. My blood ran cold. No way. There was no one outside now, I was sure of it. The lock was secure. I had checked the deadbolt earlier. But someone was inside. Someone was right behind the door, trying to get out. I stood frozen in the doorway, not knowing whether to scream or run. My mind raced. There was no way I had locked it and forgotten. There was no way I was imagining this. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I took a step back, my hand gripping the door handle, and that's when I heard it again, this time louder. The unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. My stomach dropped. That was the key. The same one I had found outside. It was turning in the lock on the inside of my door. I couldn't wait any longer. I turned and ran down the stairs, my legs shaking. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, every step feeling like I was being chased. I didn't stop until I was outside, across the street. I kept looking back, expecting to see someone coming after me. But nothing. The door to my apartment was still closed, still locked. No one was there. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been there, whoever had been rattling the door and turning the key, was still out there, waiting. It started out like a normal weekend getaway. My boyfriend, Derek, and I had been working nonstop for the past few months, and we finally decided it was time to take a short break. We rented a cozy little cabin through Airbnb out in the woods, away from everything, just the two of us. No distractions, no responsibilities, just a few days to unwind. The cabin looked perfect in the photos. Secluded, but not too far from a small town. Quiet. Peaceful. We were both looking forward to it. The drive there was scenic, with long stretches of empty roads and nothing but trees around us. When we finally arrived, it felt like we'd stepped into a different world. The cabin was a bit older, but charming in its own way. The kind of place you could picture yourself staying in forever. After settling in and unpacking, we decided to explore the area a little bit. The weather was nice, and the air smelled fresh, just what we needed. But something about the place felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. It wasn't anything big, just little things like the way the floorboards creaked more than usual or how the curtains in the living room felt a little too heavy, like they'd been shut for a long time. But I shrugged it off. It was a cabin in the woods, after all. I figured it was just part of the old charm. That night, we made dinner and settled in for a relaxing evening. We opened a bottle of wine and watched a movie. Afterward, we sat on the couch talking about everything and nothing. That's when we noticed it. A small black dot on the bookshelf, barely noticeable, almost blending into the wall. It was so small that at first, I thought it was just a dust particle or maybe something left behind from previous guests. But when I looked closer, I realized it was a camera. Not just any camera either, a small, hidden one, the kind that's designed to blend in and go unnoticed. My heart started pounding, and I froze. I didn't say anything right away, trying to process what I was seeing. But Derek, who had been talking about something random, stopped mid-sentence when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" I pointed to the camera. He stared at it for a moment, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "Is that a camera?" "I think so," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Why would there be a camera here?" We both got up and went over to examine it. The camera was mounted on the edge of the bookshelf, almost perfectly hidden by a small decorative object. It was so small that it would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Derek took it down carefully, holding it in his hand like it might explode. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to be standing there, watching us. The idea that we had been watched, without our knowledge, made my skin crawl. "We need to check the rest of the house," I said, my voice shaky. There could be more. We searched the cabin, room by room. Every closet, every corner. But the more we looked, the more paranoid I became. I started seeing things that weren't there, shadows shifting in the corners of my eyes, the feeling that someone was standing just behind me. But we didn't find anything else. Just the one camera. Still, it didn't feel right. Derek tried to stay calm. He wanted to believe it was just some weird mistake, maybe a misunderstanding. But there was no denying it. Someone had been watching us. The thought made my stomach turn. My mind raced. Had the previous guests seen it? Were they still coming back to check on us? My breath started to come quicker, and I could feel panic creeping up my chest. "We have to call the police," I said, unable to stay calm any longer. "This is serious. We need to report it." Derek hesitated. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to believe it was some kind of mistake, but he couldn't ignore the truth either. After a moment, he nodded, and I pulled out my phone. The police were understanding, but not exactly quick to act. They said they'd send someone out, but it would take a little while. As we waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still here, that we weren't alone. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, like someone was watching us from just out of sight. When the officer finally arrived, I thought maybe I could breathe easier. But as soon as we explained what had happened, his expression changed. "Did you try contacting the owner of the property?" he asked. Derek and I looked at each other. Neither of us had thought to do that. The owner's contact information was listed on the Airbnb page, so we gave the officer the number. The officer tried calling multiple times. No answer. He left a message. Still, nothing. He looked at us, his face tight. "I'm afraid this isn't going to be easy," he said. "The owner of this property is missing." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean missing?" I asked. The officer glanced down at his phone, then back at us. "According to our records, the owner has been unreachable for several weeks. No one has heard from him. He wasn't here for any of the previous bookings either, and there's no indication that he's planning on returning." Derek and I exchanged a look. This was getting worse by the minute. We had stayed in an Airbnb that was being rented out by someone who wasn't even around. We had no idea who we were dealing with, or why they were watching us. "Are you saying someone has been renting this place out illegally?" Derek asked, his voice tense. The officer nodded. "It seems that way." My mind raced. What kind of person rents out a place they don't even live in? And why would they go through the trouble of hiding cameras in the cabin? At this point, I just wanted to leave. I didn't care if the police had to sort things out. I didn't care about anything but getting out of there. "Can you stay somewhere else tonight?" the officer asked. "I'll stay here and look around some more, but it's probably best if you leave for now." We didn't need to be told twice. We packed our bags and left as quickly as we could. By the time we were in the car, I was still shaken, still wondering what kind of person would do something like this. I never found out who was behind it, but I've never been able to shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Every time I pass by an Airbnb listing, I can't help but check to see if the owner's name is familiar. It's a strange, unsettling feeling, knowing that we were just a few steps away from something far more dangerous than I ever realized. It's been months now, and I still wonder if it was all part of some twisted game, or if we were just unlucky. Either way, I don't think I'll ever stay in an Airbnb again. I never thought much about roommates before. College is busy enough without worrying about the person you're supposed to live with, right? But when I found this apartment, I couldn't say no. It was cheap, in a decent area, and the roommate, well, they seemed nice. Her name was Claire, and she was a transfer student. We exchanged a couple of texts before meeting in person. She seemed normal enough. A little shy maybe, but nothing too strange. When I moved in, she wasn't there. She had already been living in the apartment for a few months and was out at the time. I unpacked my things, trying to make the space feel like my own, but I didn't think much about her absence. She was probably busy with school or something. The first time I saw Claire in person, she was sitting on the couch, just staring at the TV. I figured we would talk at some point, get to know each other. But she didn't say anything. She didn't even look at me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was just one of those quiet people who don't really want to make small talk. But over the next few days, things started to feel off. For one, she barely ate. I would come home from class to find the kitchen still spotless, the fridge untouched. She never cooked, never ate any of the food I left in the pantry. I'm not saying she had to eat with me, but it just seemed strange how little she ate. Sometimes I'd see her sitting at the table, staring at a plate of food in front of her, but she never touched it. It's like she was waiting for something, but never did anything about it. She also never spoke. At first, I thought maybe she was just shy or introverted. But days turned into weeks, and still, nothing. She would sit on the couch in the living room or in the corner of the kitchen, just watching me. Every time I looked up, she was there. Not in a way that was aggressive or overtly creepy, but just watching me. Her eyes never left me, but she never said a word. The first few times I caught her staring, I figured maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I had just been busy and hadn't noticed her. But no matter what I was doing my homework, watching TV, cooking dinner, she was always there, in the corner, just watching. The longer I stayed, the more uncomfortable it made me. But she never moved. She didn't come up to talk to me, didn't try to engage in any way. She just sat there, staring. I started feeling like I was going crazy. Was I overreacting? Maybe she had social anxiety or was just a really private person. But it didn't feel right. It wasn't normal. Something about it was off. One night, I came back from class later than usual. I was exhausted, just ready to crash in bed. But when I opened the door, I stopped dead in my tracks. Claire was sitting on the couch again, but this time, she wasn't just watching me. She was staring at my bed. Her eyes were locked on it, and her expression was strange. It wasn't anger or anything like that, but something cold, almost calculating. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. She didn't move a muscle. Not even a blink. She just stared. I cleared my throat. Claire? She didn't respond. I repeated myself. Claire? This time, a little louder. Still nothing. I walked over to the couch, trying to act like everything was normal. Are you okay? I asked, feeling an odd mix of concern and irritation. She didn't answer. She didn't even blink. Her eyes were locked on the bed, as if she was waiting for something to happen. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was wrong, and I knew it. But what? I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't want to be rude. So, I decided to go to my room and just let it go. I told myself that maybe she was just going through something. Maybe it was nothing. But as I walked past her, I couldn't help but glance at her face. And that's when I saw it. She wasn't just sitting there. She was holding something. It was small, almost like a notebook or a journal, tucked into her lap. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she still didn't say a word. She just sat there, staring at my bed, holding the book in her hands. I rushed to my room, slammed the door behind me, and locked it. My heart was pounding. I tried to tell myself that I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head, but the image of her sitting there, watching me, it wouldn't leave me. The next few days felt like a blur. I started avoiding her more, staying in my room when I could. I couldn't get over the feeling that she was watching me, always in the corner of my vision. I started to check the locks on the doors before bed, even though they were fine. I locked them anyway. But the worst part was when I came home one evening and found something on my desk. A note. It was handwritten, neat, but small. It read, "I see you when you sleep. I know your patterns. You never leave." I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the words. My hands shook and my stomach twisted into knots. I turned around, looking for Claire. But she was in the kitchen, standing in the same spot she always stood. She wasn't looking at me, but I knew. I knew she had done this. I wasn't going to confront her. I couldn't. Something in my gut told me that it would only make things worse. I had to get out. I grabbed my things, packed a bag, and left. I stayed with a friend that night, and when I came back the next morning, Claire was gone. The apartment was empty. The journal was gone. But the note was still there, on my desk. I don't know where she went, or why she acted like that. I don't know what her intentions were. But I couldn't stay there any longer. I ended up moving out, and to this day, I don't know what happened to her. But I don't ever want to know. And I don't ever want to live with a roommate again. It was late, too late really, when my car decided to stop running on that isolated stretch of highway. I had just finished a long drive back from a work trip, the kind where you're so tired that your eyes are practically burning from keeping them open. The road was mostly empty, save for the occasional passing car that was either too far away to be of any help or zoomed by too fast to stop. I didn't panic at first. It wasn't like the engine sputtered or there was some loud bang. It just stopped, like someone turned off a switch. I rolled to the side of the road, my headlights cutting through the dark. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Maybe I had run out of gas, but the gauge was still on a quarter tank. I tried to start the engine a few times, but it wouldn't turn over. The battery was fine. It just wouldn't go. The wind was starting to pick up, and the temperature had dropped. I didn't have a jacket with me, and the car's air conditioning was broken, so the cabin was starting to get cold. I thought about just walking to the nearest gas station, but that was a good few miles away. I wasn't in the mood to risk that, especially at this hour, so I grabbed my phone and called a tow truck. The call went through immediately, which was surprising considering how far out I was. I gave them my location and was told help would be on the way soon. Honestly, I was relieved. I just wanted to get home. It wasn't long before I saw headlights in the distance. I figured it was the tow truck, but it was still a little unnerving. The area was so isolated. There weren't any streetlights, and the only thing visible beyond the car was a long stretch of dark, empty road. When the truck pulled up behind me, I rolled down the window and stuck my head out. The driver got out of the truck and walked toward me. He was tall, built like a linebacker, and wore one of those company jackets with the logo on it. He had a cap on, which I thought was strange considering the time of night, but I didn't really think much of it. When he got to my window, he greeted me with a smile. It wasn't a big one, more like a polite nod. But it was enough to make me feel like things were going to be okay. "Car trouble?" he asked, as if it were the most obvious question in the world. "Yeah," I said, glancing at the dashboard. "Won't start. Can't figure out what's wrong." The driver just nodded, but then he did something that made me feel a little uneasy. He stepped closer, peering into the car like he was inspecting me. Like he was sizing me up. It wasn't overt, but it was just enough to make me uncomfortable. "You've got a good car here," he said. "You keep it in good shape?" Yeah, it's just, this happened out of nowhere, I replied, shifting in my seat. I wasn't used to talking to strangers like this, especially not at night on an empty road. The driver didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there for a moment, his face still angled toward mine but his eyes looking off to the side, like he was thinking about something. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made my stomach tighten. "You know," he began, "I used to work with you, didn't I?" I blinked, surprised by the comment. "What?" The driver smiled, a little too wide now, and nodded. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure we worked together a while back. You were at the office in, what, the marketing department? You had that corner office with the windows. That's right, you were always on the phone with clients, weren't you?" I froze, trying to make sense of what he was saying. I didn't recognize him at all. There was no way I'd worked with him. I would have remembered. "Sorry, I don't think we've met," I said, trying to sound polite. "I don't work in marketing. And I've never had a corner office." The driver didn't seem to be listening, though. He just kept talking like he was certain of what he was saying. No, I remember you. You used to drive that blue car, right? The one with the dent on the rear fender? You were always making excuses about getting it fixed. You had a dog, too, right? The black lab? I think you brought it into the office a couple of times." His voice had this weird familiarity to it, like he was talking to an old friend, even though I had no idea who he was. The more he talked, the more my heart started to race. Everything he said, from the car to the dog, none of it made any sense. I didn't have a blue car, and I sure as hell didn't have a lab. "Sorry," I said, more firmly this time, "I think you've got the wrong person. I don't know you. I'm not sure where you're getting this from." The driver seemed to pause for a moment, staring at me in a way that felt unsettling. His expression didn't change, but it felt like there was something else behind it now. Like he was trying to figure out if I was lying. "You sure?" he asked, still with that smile. "Because I'm pretty sure we worked together on that big project. You were always the one asking for extra time on the deadlines, right? We had that lunch at the diner, don't you remember? You told me about that weird thing that happened with your brother." The more he spoke, the more it didn't make sense. I didn't have a brother, either. I felt a cold sweat forming on my forehead. Something about this guy wasn't right. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, to drive off and get away, but I was frozen. I didn't know what to do. Finally, I managed to speak again, my voice shaky. "I think you've got me confused with someone else. I've never had any of those things you're talking about." "I don't." Before I could finish, the driver took a step closer, leaning down toward me. His face was too close now, and I could see the faint glow of the streetlights reflecting off his eyes. "I know you," he whispered, his voice low and almost threatening now. "I'm not confused. I know you. And I know you're lying." My pulse raced. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I knew I needed to get away. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police, my hands shaking as I tried to hold the phone steady. The driver seemed to sense that something had shifted. He took a step back, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. "I'll just get your car hooked up," he said, but his tone had completely changed. It wasn't friendly anymore. "You don't want to make things harder than they need to be." I didn't wait. I threw the car into drive and sped off, tires screeching as I left him standing there. I could still feel his eyes on me, but I didn't dare look back. I don't know what was going on with that guy. Maybe he wasn't even a tow truck driver. Maybe he was someone else entirely. All I know is that he seemed to know way too much about me. and I never went back to that stretch of road again. I've been trying to wrap my head around what happened, and the more I think about it, the more uneasy I get. What's crazy is, it didn't seem like a big deal at first, but now I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I'm not the kind of person who gets paranoid, but after everything, I can't help it. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon, a little over a month ago. I'd just gotten home from work. It had been a long day, and I was tired, ready to just kick off my shoes and unwind. I live in a small apartment complex in a quiet part of the city. Nothing fancy, but it's home. When I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a package sitting in front of my door. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was something I had ordered. I do most of my shopping online, like most people, and I get packages all the time. But then I saw the delivery slip. There was no return address, just the name of the delivery company. Nothing else. No mention of what the package contained or where it had come from. Just my address. And there was something about it that immediately felt off. The paper was crinkled, like it had been handled more than it should have been. I don't know why that detail bothered me so much, but it did. I stood there for a few moments, just staring at the package. Should I open it? Should I wait for someone to knock on my door? I almost called the building manager, but decided against it. Maybe I was overthinking things. I just wanted to get inside, relax, so I shrugged and brought the package inside. I locked the door behind me, set the package down on the kitchen table, and went about making myself some tea. It wasn't until I sat down with the cup in hand that I finally took a closer look at the package. It was a standard brown box, taped shut with no markings or distinguishing features. I started to get that feeling in my stomach again, the one that told me I shouldn't open it, but curiosity got the best of me. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and carefully sliced open the tape. Inside, there was nothing but a stack of photos. No letter. No explanation. Just photos. They were stacked neatly, and when I picked them up, my heart skipped a beat. I don't know why I didn't immediately freak out, but I guess it didn't fully sink in at first. I flipped through the photos, one by one. The first one was of me. It was taken in my office at work, just as I was sitting at my desk, typing on my computer. The weird part was, I had no idea anyone was in the room with me. The angle of the photo made it look like it was taken from behind the door, like someone had been standing there, watching me. My heart started racing, but I couldn't bring myself to put it down. I kept looking. The next photo was even more unsettling. It was from the coffee shop I usually stop at in the mornings. The photo was taken from across the street, showing me sitting by the window, sipping my coffee. I didn't notice anyone looking at me. I mean, I couldn't have. It was just a normal day, like any other. But there it was, a perfect shot of me, right in the middle of my routine. A moment that felt so casual but now felt terrifying. I kept going, flipping through the pictures one by one. There was a photo of me at the park, walking my dog. Another one of me at the grocery store, pushing my cart. And then one of me coming out of my apartment building late at night, carrying my laundry. Each photo was taken from a different angle, a different place, but it was always me. Always. And I never noticed anyone. My breathing became shallow. My hands were shaking. My eyes kept scanning the photos over and over, hoping for some explanation, but none came. No note. No name. Just pictures of my life. Pictures of places I'd been, moments I thought no one had noticed. How long had this been going on? How long had someone been following me? The final photo was the one that made my stomach twist. It was a shot of my front door, exactly where I was standing now. The picture was taken from the other side of the hallway, like the person was hiding behind the corner of the building, watching me. My door was open slightly, and I could see the dim glow of my living room light shining through the crack. The thing that struck me the most, though, was the time on the photo's timestamp. It was taken a few minutes ago. I froze. My mind went blank. Someone was outside. Someone had been standing there, watching me just moments ago. I thought about the other pictures. How long had they been taking them? Was this the first time, or had it been happening for months? How had they gotten so close to me without me noticing? I didn't know what to do. My head was spinning. I tried to think logically. Could I just call the police? Maybe I should, but would they even take me seriously? It wasn't like the person had actually done anything. They hadn't broken into my apartment. There was nothing illegal about taking photos from a distance. But it wasn't just the photos. It was the feeling of being watched, the idea that someone had been creeping around, documenting my life without me knowing. That was what scared me. I decided I needed to do something. I called the police, explained the situation, and tried to keep my voice steady as I told them about the photos. They seemed to understand my concern, but when they arrived to take the photos and file a report, they didn't seem as alarmed as I felt. They promised they would look into it, but I could tell they weren't as convinced as I was that something was wrong. They assured me that I'd be contacted if they found anything, but I didn't feel better. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. The next few days were a blur. I didn't leave the apartment much, except for work. But even when I did, I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, convinced that I was being watched. Every time someone passed me on the street, I wondered if they were the one who had taken the pictures. Every sound in the hallway of my building made me jump. Then, one evening, about a week after the police came, I heard a knock at my door. It was late, around 10 p.m. I hesitated, heart pounding, before peeking through the peephole. No one was there. But there was something on the floor, another package. The same brown box. The same lack of return address. My stomach churned. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't not. Inside, there were more photos. The same kind of photos. Of me. Except this time, I wasn't alone. There were people in the photos with me. People I didn't recognize. Their faces were blurred, but it was clear that they were watching me too. I don't even know how to start this. It's one of those things that felt unreal when it was happening, but now, when I look back, I can't help but think it was too weird to just ignore. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I don't know. I've been riled ever since that night. It all started when I was on a long drive back from a work trip. I had left pretty late, trying to make good time, but by the time I realized it, it was already past midnight. The road I was on was pretty quiet, with barely any lights for miles. I didn't think I'd find anything until I saw a sign on the side of the road, a faded, weathered board that said motel rooms available. I had already passed a few places before that were all shut up for the night, so I figured I'd give it a try. It wasn't the most promising place. There was no fancy lighting or anything, just a rundown old building that looked like it hadn't seen any updates in decades. But I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. I pulled into the parking lot and parked near the office. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Not just in the way that a typical motel might be at night, but it was still. Like there was no sound at all. It was a little unsettling, but I was tired enough that I brushed it off. When I walked into the office, there was this old man behind the counter, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a worn-out sweater and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He looked up as I came in and smiled too wide, almost like it was forced. It didn't sit right with me, but again, I was just tired. "Need a room?" he asked, his voice a bit too cheerful for the hour. "Yeah," I said, rubbing my eyes. "Just for the night. I've been driving all day." He nodded and slid a piece of paper over to me. "We've got a room in the back. It's a little different, but it's quiet." I looked at the paper. The price seemed fair enough, but something about his tone made me pause. It was like he was trying to sell me something, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. "Room in the back?" I repeated, more out of confusion than anything else. Yes, he said, his hands moving quickly as he fumbled with a key. "It's the last one available, and it's more private, just how you like it." I didn't really have a preference for where I stayed, so I nodded and took the key from him. He handed it to me with both hands, like it was something precious. I didn't understand what was going on, but I didn't feel like making a scene, so I just said thanks and headed toward the back of the building. The whole place felt wrong. It wasn't just the fact that it was so quiet. There was a sense of neglect too. The paint was peeling on the walls, and the lights flickered like they weren't used to being on. I shook it off, though. Motels can get run down. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed in one that looked a little sketchy. When I reached the door to my room, I noticed something odd. There was no number on the door. Not even a little plaque, nothing. Just a plain wooden door with a simple lock. I thought that was strange, but I had already decided to roll with it. Maybe the place didn't bother with the little details. Maybe the room didn't get much traffic and the door hadn't been replaced. I don't know. I don't know why I thought it was fine. The inside of the room was dark, but I could make out the furniture. A bed, a dresser, a small desk, and a chair. It wasn't a great room by any means, but it was clean enough. I could hear the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere, but other than that, it was completely silent. I set my bag down on the bed, stretched, and started to get ready to settle in. There wasn't much to do at that hour, so I turned on the TV, though it was mostly static and flickered in and out. I didn't mind. I was too tired to care. After a while, I started to notice something odd. I hadn't seen any other cars when I arrived, and the parking lot was still empty, but now, as I stood by the window and looked out, I realized there was not a single other light on in the entire building. No other rooms were occupied, at least not that I could tell. The place felt like it was completely deserted. I'm not the kind of person to get paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was alone in that building. There was no one else in the halls, no noise from any of the other rooms. Just that eerie silence. I tried to brush it off as nothing, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like the walls were closing in around me. I decided to head to the office to ask about the other rooms. Maybe I was just imagining things, but I felt weird being the only one there. When I opened the door to the hallway, I was hit with a wave of cold air, like the place hadn't been heated properly. The air felt stale. I made my way down the hallway toward the office, but as I walked past each door, I realized something. None of the rooms had numbers on them. I couldn't tell where one room started and another ended. It was like the building had no sense of organization. I stopped in front of the office, took a deep breath, and knocked. The manager answered quickly, almost as if he had been waiting for me. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice too soft, almost syrupy. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, it's fine. Just wondering, are there any other people staying here tonight? It's pretty quiet." He smiled again, and this time it looked more like a grin than a genuine smile. "Oh, no. Just you, my friend. You're the only guest tonight. That's when I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was something about the way he said it that made me feel uneasy. I could have sworn I saw something flicker in his eyes, like he was hiding something. I didn't know if it was just my tired mind playing tricks, but it felt like he was watching me more closely than necessary. I started to back away slowly, my heart beating a little faster. Well, I guess I'll just go back to my room then. Thanks, I muttered, barely managing to smile back at him. He nodded again, that same two-eyed grin still plastered on his face. Of course. You enjoy your stay. I quickly turned around and went back to my room, locking the door behind me. I tried to settle back down, but the unease wouldn't leave me. I kept hearing the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, but whenever I looked out, no one was there. The building felt like it was closing in, pressing in on me. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my things, went back to the front, and left without looking back. I didn't even care about the money I paid for the night. I just needed to get out of there. When I got in my car and drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the manager standing in the parking lot, watching me leave. But nothing. It was like the whole place was just waiting for someone. I've never been able to explain it. The manager's strange behavior, the emptiness of the motel, the unsettling silence that hung in the air. I still don't know what the hell happened, but every time I think about it, I feel that same creeping sensation on the back of my neck. Something about that place was wrong. Something about that manager was wrong. I don't know what it was, but I'm sure I'll never go back to that motel again. It started a few weeks ago. I had just moved into a new place in a quiet neighborhood, one of those suburban areas where everything feels calm, almost too calm. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knows each other, or at least they're supposed to. I didn't really know anyone yet, except for a few small hellos and polite smiles. The house I moved into was small but cozy, and for the first time in a long time, I thought I might actually enjoy living somewhere. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors were nice, the street was quiet, and the only sounds at night were the occasional dog barking or the soft hum of traffic from the main road. But then, there was her. I don't know how else to describe it, but there was something about the woman who lived next door that made me uneasy from the start. Her house was the one with the white picket fence, and I noticed right away that her front yard was always perfectly kept. She never had any kids running around, no pets, just an immaculate lawn. Every time I walked past, I could see her in the window, sitting in a chair by the window, staring outside. It wasn't like she was looking at anything in particular, more like she was just staring, blankly. I didn't think too much of it at first. Maybe she was just a quiet person, I told myself. But as the days went on, I started to feel like I was being watched. It was subtle at first. I'd be in my living room, or maybe in my kitchen, and I'd catch a glimpse of her standing in her window, or just peering through the blinds. At first, I thought it was nothing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But then I started noticing it more. Every time I walked outside to get the mail, or if I was in the yard watering my plants, I'd see her. Just standing there in the window. It felt like she was waiting for me to do something. One day, I decided to bring it up to my friend, Jess. She's the kind of person who always laughs things off, and I figured it would just be one of those things that sounded worse in my head. When I told her about the neighbor, she just chuckled. "Oh, come on. You're probably just imagining it. It's probably nothing," she said, but I could see that even she seemed a little unsure, just from the way I was talking about it. Still, she didn't seem convinced. A few days passed, and the unease grew. The woman next door, her name, I learned, was Karen, was always there, every time I went outside. And I don't mean just in the yard, I mean inside her house, standing by the window, looking out at me. There was never any movement. She never waved. She just stood there, and it was beginning to get to me. One afternoon, I had some friends over for a barbecue. Jess, of course, was there, along with a few others from the neighborhood. We were having a good time, drinking, talking, enjoying the warm weather. But when Jess went inside to grab some more chips, I saw Karen. She was standing by her window again, her face just visible behind the blinds. It was almost like she was staring at me, watching every move I made. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't help myself. I pointed her out to the group. "Look, she's doing it again," I said, laughing nervously. "She's standing by the window. Doesn't she ever do anything else?" My friends all looked over, and at first, there was no reaction. I was half expecting them to tell me I was being paranoid again, but then Jess frowned. "Yeah, I've noticed that too," she said quietly, glancing at the window. "She always seems to be staring out there, doesn't she?" Now that Jess had noticed, the others started to chime in. A few of them said they'd seen Karen at the window before, but it had never struck them as strange. I couldn't understand that. How could they not see how odd it was? It wasn't like she was just sitting there. She was always standing at the window, staring, with no sign of her moving, like she was waiting for something to happen. But when we all looked at her house together, the blinds were open, just like always. That was when it clicked. Why are her blinds always open? I asked, my voice trembling a little more than I meant for it to. I've never seen them closed. It's like she's always watching. Jess bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with how serious I was now. "Yeah, I guess you're right. That is a little weird." I felt a pit in my stomach. I had never really thought about it until that moment, but she was always there. Always watching, always waiting. And now that I had pointed it out, Jess was starting to see it too. For a brief moment, I felt like maybe I wasn't crazy after all. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I pulled the blinds shut in my own house and locked all the doors. I even double-checked the back door, just in case. As I lay in bed, I kept imagining that I would look out the window and see her standing there, staring back at me, like she was just waiting for me to notice. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, that it was nothing. But the next day, something happened that I couldn't explain. I had been out running errands all morning, and when I got home, I noticed something odd. Karen's front door was slightly ajar. I'd never seen her door open before. It had always been shut tight. But now, it was open, just a crack, as if someone had gone inside and forgotten to close it. I stood there for a moment, frozen. Should I go over and knock? Should I call someone? I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing, and I couldn't help but feel this terrible, sick feeling in my gut. That night, I decided to call the police. I didn't know if anything was wrong, but something in my gut told me that I wasn't being paranoid anymore. This wasn't just weird. It felt dangerous. I explained everything to them, the way Karen had always been watching me, the open door, and how the blinds were always pulled back like she was waiting for something. They promised they'd send someone over to check it out, but they never did. I didn't hear anything back from them, and the next few days passed without incident. But the whole situation started to feel stranger and stranger. I couldn't shake the thought that Karen was still watching me, and every time I looked out my own window, I'd catch a glimpse of her. Always by the blinds, just staring, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to make her move. Finally, a few weeks later, I had had enough. I decided to call it quits and put my house on the market. I couldn't live like this anymore. The constant feeling of being watched had eaten away at me. It wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the entire neighborhood, and I wasn't sure who I could trust. I ended up moving to a new place, far away from that neighborhood. It took a while for the anxiety to leave me, but over time, I started to feel normal again. But I still can't help but wonder, was I the only one who noticed? How many others saw her standing there, staring out of her window, and just chose to ignore it? I don't know what was going on next door, but I'm just glad to be away from it. I still can't shake the feeling that something was off with Karen, and I wonder if I'll ever truly be able to forget that feeling of being watched. I was driving home late one night, a long stretch of road with nothing but darkness around me. I had been on the highway for what felt like hours, and I was starting to get tired. My gas light came on just as I passed a sign for a gas station, so I figured I'd pull in and top off. It didn't seem like much of a choice, since there weren't many other places for miles. The station was small, almost like one of those places that felt stuck in time, nothing fancy, just a single pump in an old, dimly lit building. I pulled up to the pump and turned off the engine, the sound of the tires rolling to a stop the only noise in the otherwise quiet night. The station had an old-fashioned feel to it, with peeling paint on the pump and a flickering light above the door. I didn't think much of it at first, just another small, almost abandoned gas station on a lonely road. I stepped out of the car and stretched, my legs sore from sitting in the same position for so long. The air smelled stale, but it wasn't cold, not yet. I glanced around as I walked toward the entrance, noticing that the place seemed emptier than I expected. There was no one else around, not even any cars. I figured it was just late, but it felt strange, like something was off. I reached for the door, and when I pushed it open, a small bell jingled. The inside of the station looked old, with dusty shelves full of chips and snacks, an outdated soda machine in the corner, and a few random items scattered around. Behind the counter was a man, maybe in his mid-30s, wearing a red uniform with the gas station's logo. His eyes met mine the second I stepped inside, and I could immediately tell something was wrong. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me. His face was tense, his expression unreadable. I thought maybe it was just the late hour, or maybe he was tired, but then I noticed something else. He was glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, looking nervously around the store like he was expecting someone or something to come in. I didn't want to be rude, but I could feel the unease creeping in. I gave him a small nod and made my way over to the counter to pay. I figured I'd get in and out quickly, not wanting to linger longer than I had to. But as I got closer, I saw his eyes dart toward the door again, like he was trying to make sure no one was outside. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. I figured he might just be jumpy from the late shift. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept glancing back toward the door and then over to the window behind him, where the dim light barely illuminated the parking lot. Finally, he spoke, but his voice was quiet, like he didn't want to be heard. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, but it didn't sound convincing at all. "You, need anything else?" I didn't want to push it, but I could feel my gut telling me something was wrong. I shook my head and pulled out my wallet. "No, just the gas. I'm good." He took the money, but he didn't give me any change, which was strange. I tried to ignore it, assuming maybe they didn't do cash back or something. But as I was about to leave, I noticed something else that threw me off. The door had locked behind me. It clicked shut with a heavy sound, and I looked over my shoulder to see the man standing there, staring at me. He hadn't even moved to ring up the gas yet. "Hey," I said, turning back toward him. "The door's locked. You mind opening it?" The man didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes wide, his lips tight. For a second, I wondered if maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, it was late, and the guy probably wasn't used to seeing people at this hour. But then the moment dragged on too long, and I started to feel a little more uncomfortable. "Hey, I need to go. Can you unlock the door?" He didn't say anything. He just stared at me, looking like he didn't even recognize I was talking to him. His gaze had shifted, and it wasn't nervous anymore, it was something else. Something almost fearful. I reached for the door handle and pulled, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked, and I could hear the faint sound of metal against metal as I tried to turn the knob. The man behind the counter didn't move a muscle, just kept staring at me, and my pulse began to race. I knocked on the glass of the door, but there was no response. "Hey!" I shouted now, a little louder than I meant to. "What the hell is going on?" That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The man wasn't looking at me anymore. He wasn't looking at anything at all. His head was turned slightly, his eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. His entire posture had changed, his shoulders tight, as though he was waiting for something. Or someone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I backed away from the door, suddenly aware of how empty and silent the entire building was. There was no sound except for the low hum of the lights above, and even the air felt still, like the kind of stillness before something happens, the kind of quiet that comes before danger. I turned back to the counter, hoping to get some kind of answer from the man, but before I could say anything else, I heard a faint sound, a scraping noise from the back of the store. It was a soft, dragging sound, like something heavy being moved across the floor. I froze, every muscle in my body tense as I waited for the noise to stop. It didn't stop. It came closer, slowly, like someone was pulling something large toward the front of the store. I didn't know what it was or what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest as I tried to keep my breathing steady. I turned to look at the man behind the counter again, but he was still standing there, staring blankly, his eyes wide but unseeing. I reached for my phone in my pocket and dialed 911 as quietly as I could, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal was dead, and I cursed under my breath. I felt trapped, locked in a small gas station with a man who seemed to be completely out of his mind. The scraping sound was getting louder, closer. My mind raced. What was happening? What was that sound? It was so loud now, it felt like it was coming from right behind me. I turned quickly, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the store was still empty. The noise had stopped, too. The silence returned, almost too quickly, too perfectly. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stand there much longer, and I sure as hell didn't want to be anywhere near that man. I ran back to the door, rattling the handle again, shouting for help, but there was no answer. The station was locked up tight, and I was the only one there. My mind was racing, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it together. And then, just as suddenly as it had all started, the door clicked open. I didn't wait to see who had unlocked it. I grabbed the handle and yanked it open, stumbling out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, engine running, speeding off down the road. I haven't stopped driving since then. I haven't gone near another gas station in the middle of nowhere. And every time I close my eyes, I hear that scraping noise. I don't know what it was or what the hell happened at that gas station, but I know one thing for sure, I'll never go back. It started out so innocently. I didn't think much of it at first. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through my phone, when I saw a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: "You look nice today." I didn't recognize the number, but it wasn't that unusual. Sometimes you get messages from people you don't know, maybe a wrong number or someone trying to make small talk. I didn't think too hard about it. I just brushed it off and went about my evening. But then it kept happening. The next day, I got another message. This one read, "You always order the same thing for lunch. Turkey sandwich with extra mayo, right?" It was odd. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. I've always ordered the same lunch at the same cafe near my work, but it didn't feel right. How did this person know that? I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. I hadn't posted it online. I told myself to let it go. It was probably some random person, or maybe a joke from one of my friends. But then the messages started getting more personal. The day after that, I got a text that said, "You didn't go to the gym today. I saw you walking past it though." My stomach turned when I read that. I didn't remember seeing anyone, but I had walked past the gym on my way home from work. It felt like an unsettling coincidence, but my heart started racing. I hadn't mentioned to anyone that I planned to go to the gym or that I changed my routine. How could this person know that? I ignored the text and tried to go on with my day. But then the call started. I was sitting at my desk the following morning when my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number again. I was hesitant, but I picked it up. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice was shaky. There was silence on the other end, nothing but static. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes calls drop or get disconnected. I hung up and went back to work. But a few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I stared at it, unsure whether I should answer. My hand hovered over the screen for a moment before I decided to pick it up. "Hello?" I said again, this time my voice a little more firm. I waited, but the silence stretched on, and just as I was about to hang up, I heard a faint whisper on the other end. It was so quiet I could barely make it out. "Are you alone?" the voice asked. My blood ran cold. I didn't answer. I just hung up. After that, the calls kept coming. At first, I tried to ignore them. I blocked the numbers, but new ones kept showing up, all from different, unregistered numbers. Each time I answered, there was either silence or that soft, haunting whisper, "Are you alone?" I didn't know what to do. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe it was just some prank, or maybe someone had gotten hold of my number and was messing with me. But then things escalated. A few days after the call, I came home to find my door slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it when I left that morning. My stomach sank as I pushed the door open, half expecting to find someone inside. But there was nothing. Everything seemed normal except for a small slip of paper on the floor by the door. It was a piece of scrap paper, folded in half. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling, and unfolded it. Written in messy handwriting were just 2 words, "I see you." I froze, staring at the paper in disbelief. My heart pounded in my chest. It felt like the world had gone still, like everything around me had suddenly turned dark. I wanted to believe it was just a sick joke. Maybe a neighbor playing some twisted game. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This wasn't just some prank. This was someone who knew things about me, someone who was watching me. I called the police. I had to. They took the report seriously, but they didn't seem to have any leads. I told them about the strange calls, the messages, and now the note. They said they'd keep an eye on the area and advised me to be extra cautious. For the next few days, I stayed on high alert. I made sure to lock all the doors and windows, double-checking everything before I left for work. I stopped walking around my apartment with the blinds open. Every sound outside made me jump. I didn't go anywhere without looking around, constantly worried that someone was right there, watching me. But then came the final straw, the thing that made me realize how truly dangerous this was. It was late at night. I was in bed, trying to sleep, when my phone buzzed. I groggily reached over to grab it, half expecting it to be another prank call. But when I looked at the screen, my heart nearly stopped. It was a picture. A picture of me, taken from across the street, standing in my own living room. The caption simply read, "I can see you right now." I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen. My hands shook and my mouth went dry. I felt like I was suffocating. I immediately called the police again, but this time, I wasn't just asking for advice, I was terrified. I needed them to do something. The officers came over and searched the area, but they couldn't find anyone. They couldn't find any trace of the person who had been harassing me. They couldn't even tell me how they got the picture of me in my living room. They told me to be careful and that they would increase patrols in the area, but it didn't bring me any comfort. That night, I slept with every light on, every lock engaged. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore. But it didn't stop. The messages, the calls, the constant feeling of being watched, it all continued. But then, a week later, it suddenly stopped. No more messages. No more calls. No more notes. It was like whoever it was had just disappeared. I never found out who it was or why they targeted me. The police couldn't find anything. I moved to a new place, far from where I lived before, hoping to escape whatever had been happening. But even now, every time I hear my phone ring, my heart skips a beat, and I check the number before I pick it up. It's been a year since it all stopped, and I still look over my shoulder sometimes. I don't feel safe. Not completely. The person who did that to me knew things no one should know. And I still can't shake the feeling that they're out there somewhere, waiting.